amidst the chaos, or will the shadows of the past consume them all? The people of Cowtown had gotten used to visitors, especially after the recent troubles like the attacks and other incidents. However, the local law enforcement knew that this new group of strong, fit individuals would attract a lot of attention. They decided to create a way to introduce them to the town to manage the buzz. The Army Rangers were used to rough living conditions, so they found the accommodations at the house and barn quite acceptable, even if a few had to sleep on couches and air mattresses. They were all up early at 5:30. The smell of coffee filled the house, waking everyone except Janice. Carl came over at 6 o'clock to grab some coffee, and he started talking about how to keep April safe while she was still on the base. "You say you have people looking out for her, but that place is massive, and April moves around a lot between her room and therapy. Their enemies might find a way past the guards at the gate, so how will you keep her safe?" he asked. "Besides the Delta Cross men you met who stayed on base, there's Tiny, the orderly who pushed Jack into your room, and now he's helping with April's wheelchair. Captain Allen and Lieutenant Simmons oversee her care, and you've likely noticed that many of the staff in her area look like they come from military training. The protection of April goes far beyond Delta Cross and involves both the base commander and the provost marshal. While I can't share all the details, the bravery of Captain Marvel and Wonder Woman has earned them respect from higher-ups, so it's unlikely they will face harm on the base. The danger comes when they leave the base." "Carl Clayton Armstrong, did you not promise to wake me as soon as the coffee was ready? And Captain Cross, didn't I ask the same question last night when you didn't answer? Do you really think Wonder Woman is too fragile to know, or too uninformed to understand the security measures? I may not be a ranger, but I've shown I'm neither naive nor weak." Being called out over morning coffee by a strong, confident woman dressed in work boots and jeans surprised the captain a bit, which entertained his team and the Armstrong brothers. He quickly apologized and explained that he planned to fill her in as soon as she joined them. Jack stepped in to save him from more questions from his sister. Wonder Woman, didn't you just hear the whole briefing the captain gave to Carl? That's not the issue. Just because I'm the only woman here doesn't mean I should be left out of important discussions. If I hadn't woken up and overheard, I'd still be in the dark. No, ma'am, I want you to know that I really meant to give a complete answer to your questions from last night. The men probably got all the information they needed, but I know you will want to know more, and I'm happy to help." She filled her cup with coffee, added some sugar, and turned to the group of men. With a raised eyebrow, she looked directly at Captain Cross. "I expect you to keep your word, Captain. Let's meet later today after we finish the morning and lunch plans." What comes next? For everyone except the Rangers, the next step was to gather in front of the large TV in the secure basement to watch the drone in action. Chi was flying the drone and showing Danny how to use the controls, while explaining to others how to analyze the landscape from above. You're used to looking from the ground, or maybe from a height like a hunting stand. Aerial views are different, so pay attention. Your choices from the video or photos could affect people's safety. Danny picked it up quickly, but the other officers and the Armstrongs had a harder time spotting potential hiding places in the terrain. Within an hour, Danny was flying the drone while Chi guided him to help improve his skills and the skills of the others who were struggling. No one had mentioned the Rangers since they started this exercise, but a strange shape along the edge of a shadow made Carl shout, "Wait!" and Chi laughed. "Circle back! I think I saw a boot in the shade of that big huisach bush." Danny turned the drone around, but they didn't see anything unusual. After a moment, he started to guide the drone back on its original northeast to southwest path, but Shai told him to stop. "Keep going. Lower it to 20 feet and then turn it around and fly across the area from east to west." Danny followed the instruction, and as the drone passed over the huisach, they spotted a man hiding beneath its branches. "Wow, how many have we missed?" Renee asked. "There are many out there, watching from the house to the river, so you've missed however many are involved. Don't worry too much, though they're really good at staying hidden. I've only seen 3, but I believe there are more." Danny lifted the drone back above the trees and started another search of the area by the river, but this time he changed the search pattern. After 20 minutes, they only spotted one more person until Chui had Danny lower the drone to the treetops, then rise back to 50 feet and wiggle the wings. At that signal, 6 men appeared from their hiding spots, waving their arms. "What the heck?" Elias exclaimed. "Those guys are like chameleons. One moment I saw nothing, then suddenly 6 men appeared." Chewie chuckled and told Danny to contact one of the men, then bring the drone back to the base and land it. Danny complied, but the landing could have been better. 15 minutes later, everyone was gathered in the common area, where the Rangers had some fun at the expense of their unaware teammates. However, Renee interrupted them, saying, "All right, everyone needs to change into casual clothes so we can go eat and introduce you to the townsfolk. This was our first try, and at least we spotted 2 of you." The Rangers laughed. Wash gave Renee a supportive pat and said, "That boot you finally noticed was my 5th try to get your attention. I think everyone else tried that many times, so don't get too confident just yet." "Oh, don't worry, I'm very modest," Jack responded. "I can see a coyote's ears wobble from 200 yards away, but I missed you guys completely. Carl was the one who finally saw the boot you had out in plain sight, or Danny would probably still be flying that drone until it ran out of battery." Abraham Cross chimed in with a mix of seriousness and encouragement. "You were not great, but you weren't the worst we've seen. I'm sure you'll spot city boys better than the last group we faced, so we need to prepare you for what lies ahead, whether it's here or in an urban setting. Now, Delta Company, let's change into regular clothes and blend in." They all piled into the Cow County law enforcement van and Jack's truck, heading to Treen's Cafe by the muddy river. Janice was still driving and Jack was in the front seat. He was recovering well, feeling a bit better each day. He was still sore and had some stiffness, but things were improving. The lunchtime crowd was busy, but they quickly got a table reserved for the sheriff. Their drink orders were made, and they started looking through the menus when an older man in a suit approached the sheriff. He nodded at the Armstrongs, Danny, and Elias, then turned to Renee. "Good afternoon, Sheriff Rodriguez. I see you have plenty of backup today. Is something happening?" The sheriff stood and spoke loudly for everyone to hear. "Good afternoon, Mr. Williams. To answer your question, it's a bit of both. These gentlemen are here to help us out. After the recent troubles in our county and growing worries about drug and human trafficking, Homeland Security and the Department of Defense provided us with some military vehicles and equipment. We've brought in this team, led by Captain Abraham Cross, who is down at the far end of the table. They are patiently teaching us how to use and care for the equipment, and Jack Armstrong is kindly allowing us to train at his ranch. Gentlemen, I'm happy to welcome you to our community. If you need any help, feel free to visit Cowtown State Bank on Main Street. I think I can speak for everyone when I say we appreciate how Sheriff Rodriguez has looked after our needs and found ways to help us. As a Gulf War veteran, I didn't think I would see this level of technology outside a conflict zone. But I understand things are different now, and I value your support for our law enforcement." Looking at the group, she smiled and said, "Carl, Janice, Jack, it's nice to see you all together again. It's been a while. You two seem to be getting better. How is April doing?" Janice replied, "Carl and I visited her yesterday, Terry. She still has a long road ahead, but she is strong inside. Even though she looks delicate, she can handle a lot. It may take some time, but I believe she'll be back on her feet soon." "Where is Carrie now? I heard she was in Colorado last time." "Carrie is still in Denver, Ken is still in Silicon Valley, Bobby is now in New York City, and Clara, Joe, and I are still waiting for grandkids. I don't understand why young people think they can't have children before they turn 30. While he sounded a bit frustrated, his smile was warm. Nonetheless, it worried Jack, Janice, Carl, and some of the Delta Cross team. Why were they nearing 30, or in the captain's case, 35, without starting their families? Jack felt a wave of sadness. Just before April left for Washington, they had agreed she would stop her birth control when she returned. Those lovely daughters who looked like their mother and those strong sons who would have his character and strength would never come to be. Jack's stomach twisted as he felt a heavy weight inside him. After they left, Elias went home to be with his wife before returning to work later that night. Danny went home to be with his pregnant wife and to welcome their 2 sons when they got off the school bus. Renee rode back to the ranch with the others, but stepped aside when they arrived to call his wife of 10 years and assure her of his love. Though harmless, Terry Williams' questions about April and children had reminded everyone of how fragile life can be and of their hopes for the future. "Did you and the town banker plan that in advance?" Lieutenant Dan Wilkins asked. It was impressive. Both of you standing together, drawing everyone's attention in the cafe, speaking loud enough for all to hear, it seemed rehearsed. No, we didn't plan it, but when I saw him sitting there and noticed that everyone was watching, I expected him to react like that. He is a wonderful man and a skilled politician. I don't mean this in a bad way. He has a unique skill for bringing people together for a cause and an even rarer ability to recognize which causes are good and which are not. He noticed us come in, saw the curious looks on the faces of the townsfolk, understood that we were at a popular cafe for a reason, and let me introduce you. Trust me, by now everyone in town knows you're here and why, and they were paying close attention. He would make a great mayor, judge, or any other elected leader, but he's happy just being the reason our school district is so well-regarded president of the Board of Trustees for 11 years. He's a treasure in this town. Everyone at the table liked him. The lunch was great, but the way the sheriff and the banker engaged the crowd assured the Delta Cross team would be accepted. Since they were helping the sheriff keep the town safe, they would be looked after, as small towns often do. Jack thought it was well done. The seriousness in Alfred's voice brought them back to the moment. "Boss Captain, we need to talk, and then we need to include everyone. Please stay here until we call for you," Alfred said, nodding toward the larger group. Jack and Abraham followed Alfred down to the basement and sat in front of the 3 monitors as instructed, looking curiously at Sue and Croc. "We accessed the King servers last night, and we think we did it without being noticed. We'll brag about it later when we're sure, but trust me, the Pentagon has nothing on these guys. Anyway, it will take years to go through the 20 years of data we downloaded. While we were gathering information, I kept an eye out for trouble, and Croc was creating a program to search for certain names and phrases. We struck gold almost right away with April Armstrong and Janice Armstrong, but it took us a little while to sort and arrange everything in order. We're starting with April's arrival in Washington. There was a lot of cutting and mixing, so it's a bit jumpy, but just sit back and watch." Half an hour later, Jack was searching for the right words to apologize to his sister for accusing her of leading April astray. He still had serious worries about her decisions, especially why she hadn't told him right away, and her actions after they were told he had died. He was completely wrong about her part in April's situation, and he had told her that was why he could never forgive her. He knew he would have to humble himself, since he had refused to let either of them explain their sides, but he dreaded the conversation he needed to have with April. From what he had seen so far, it was clear the videos and audio Sue and Croc had taken would either prove or disprove what he thought. He was starting to doubt his earlier beliefs. Croc abruptly interrupted his thoughts. "The search for Armstrong found information we all need to hear right away. Trust me, it will make you rethink what we discussed yesterday. Time is running out, and if we show this only to you two, we will miss important time." Captain Cross headed out, called everyone back, and Jack helped arrange folding chairs in a half circle around the monitors. Once everyone was seated, Croc quickly explained what they were about to see and where it came from. People gasped at the idea of them retrieving information from protected servers in the cloud. Then they started the audio. It included snippets of video, not always in order since they were using various sources, but the message was clear. It soon became obvious. They were in serious trouble, but Janice and April were on the King's most wanted list, with rewards over $5 million if caught alive. Jack was less significant, worth only $100,000, but since he was wanted dead, that amount would still bring danger. 2 well-known mercenary groups were already in the chase for the girls. Jack had an open contract on him, meaning many people could be danger for him. The sheriff quickly called his deputies, state troopers, and border patrol officers in Cowtown. Captain Cross reached out to his teams in San Antonio, redirected another team in Houston, and contacted allies in Homeland Security and the Pentagon. They would need a lot of support, possibly even plans for safety later on. The pilots got secure satellite phones and returned to town to prepare the helicopters and drones. Carl, Janice, and Jack met in the conference room to discuss their situations, options, and April's situation. After an hour, Jack asked Alfred to join them, and they talked about the money they would need in the upcoming days and weeks. "The resources are still available, boss, but it's becoming harder to get in and out. Next time I go, I'll take Croc along for safety. We will get what we need and then destroy it, so you need to know how much money you want before we leave. The more you need, the longer we will be working, but we can probably get a few $100 million, especially since we are already in a risky position. Let's bring the captain and sheriff in to see what they can tell us about costs, Jack replied. Captain Cross spoke first in response. I'm guessing our next steps depend a lot on how much help we get from the government. If they give us portable missile systems, we won't have to buy as many ourselves. We need to be ready for attacks from both the sky and the ground. The private military groups that got the contracts are very active in Africa and Ukraine, so they might have access to missiles and drones. The sheriff listened and then asked if having the numbers by noon tomorrow would be soon enough. He agreed with the captain that missiles could be involved and said it would definitely take until then to get responses from potential allies. Then he began to seem more worried. Soon, we'll need to reveal the bounties and identify who is behind them if we want the support we need. As influential as Daniel King is, and with the powerful men he controls, everything could fall apart if we do this. Captain Cross suggested, "Let me handle that tonight, Sheriff. I have a friend who might be able to help us figure it out. But if we involve him, we'll need to share whatever he wants to know. He could betray us, but that wouldn't be like him. Still, we have to decide whether to act alone against a very dangerous organization, or to ask for help and pay the price for it." "Do whatever you find necessary, Abraham," Jack replied. "The Armstrongs are already in serious trouble." Jack left the conference room to find Janice, who was entertaining the troops, including Cousin Carl. He paused in the dark hallway to listen as she shared funny stories with the remaining Rangers. One of them seemed impressed with her lively spirit. He hated to interrupt, but they were pressed for time. "Hey everyone, it sounds like you're having a great time, but I need to talk to Janice and Carl. The captain wants to speak with all of you too. He and the sheriff are in the big conference room on the right. Alfred, Charlie, can you gather some details from around the time April and Janice learned I was gone? We also need to discuss their journal, how to keep it safe, and how to make it a topic of conversation worldwide if something happens to them." Turning to his sister and cousin, he said, "Let's head into the small conference room. We need to go over some of the journal and then discuss it." "Before we start, Carl," he said as Janice connected one of the USB drives, "I need you to be open-minded. I can't be sure what we'll find in there, but you might hear things that surprise you, and you may have things to share too. Janice, let's begin with your meeting with April in Washington." To Jack's deep regret, the things he had kept from them echoed the words he had heard from their captors just over an hour ago. Janice kept her eyes on Jack as he listened to the story about the private dinner that changed everything for April. He focused on the details leading up to the events that unfolded after that night. When the replay finished, Jack motioned for it to stop. He shared a long look with his sister and then crawled over to her chair. He took her hands, which she allowed him to hold, and began to speak. "I know I don't deserve your help, sister, and I will understand if you can't provide it. I was foolish to think you would set my wife and your best friend up for something so terrible, and I regret every word I said about that. I fear that when I hear the full story I've kept myself from knowing, I'll regret even more. I judged you harshly and said I would never forgive you for something you didn't do, something I should have known you would never do. I'm not asking for forgiveness that I don't deserve, but I acknowledge I was completely wrong about that. I promise to listen to your side of the story with an open heart, and I hope April will too." Janice knelt down and hugged her brother. She kissed his head and then gently reminded him, "I'm still upset about what you said to me and April. I've seen the edited videos that manipulative person used to control the women and girls involved. Alfred told me he found those clips on a senator's server. If he had let us explain and kept an open mind, maybe we could have helped him see the truth. But my brother is too stubborn for that, so here we are." Janice stood up and pulled on Jack's shoulders. "Come on, get up. We don't need to dwell on this any longer. I forgave you when I saw you rescuing people from the wreckage even while you were hurt, but with April, that's different. She expected to come home to you with open arms, convinced that everything would go back to the way it was. She was even thinking about having kids right away because she didn't want to wait. I tried to caution her, but in her eyes, you were her hero, and she believed you both would have a happy ending. But just so you know, there's a reason she won't talk to you or let you see her. Sure, she has her pride, but you really hurt her, and then she got injured trying to protect you. I'm sorry to say this, but begging won't change her mind. Honestly, I'm not sure anything will. In just 2 days, you went from being her knight in shining armor to someone she sees as a villain. You and your closed mind and bad temper ruined a brave and wonderful woman. Every hour of their lives felt tense as they got ready for whatever plans the two contractors, now known to be private military and security groups connected to Russia, had in store. They worked long shifts since 8 to 12 hours weren't enough, and the sheriff's office had other duties too. Rangers, airborne, SEALs, and other special operators were called in, getting paid with funds taken from Daniel King and his accomplice, who were urgently looking for a large sum of money that had gone missing from overseas accounts. Captain Cross and his team, working with local, state, and federal authorities, put together an unusual teamwork response to the threats posed by these groups. The reason behind this was that foreign mercenaries, now labeled as terrorists by federal officials, were seen as a serious threat to American citizens living in Cow County, Texas, and nearby areas. Jack and Janice helped when needed, but let the experts handle the planning. They focused on making sure April had the medical and emotional support she needed and getting her back to the ranch. They had permission for the best plastic surgeon at BAMC to treat her visible but serious injuries on her face, neck, arms, and shoulders, and Dr. Scott managed to finish his work in one session. April was wrapped in bandages but felt more comfortable and confident as she healed. Ideally, she would have stayed at BAMC longer, but because of the threat, she needed strong protection, and being with Janice and Jack was better than trying to keep her safe elsewhere. She wouldn't have returned to the ranch without Janice's clever plan and help from BAMC staff who ignored the unusual circumstances. A late-night visit from her best friend led to an unexpected trip to the ambulance entry due to cleaning crews, a drink of water from a bottle Janice had, and the sudden arrival of paramedics who took her from Janice's arms and placed her in an ambulance. Janice joined them, and they left the hospital. No one had ever traveled the way they did from BAMC to Cowtown, but April woke up in her bed at the ranch. This caused a lot of confusion and frustration, leading to an upset outburst when Janice came in to calm her and explain what had happened. Carl came down too, but he just stood there looking concerned until her frustration passed, and he joined Janice in reassuring her. "Look at me. Do I seem ready to leave the hospital? Who will care for my injuries? Who will help with my physical and occupational therapy? Take me back right now or I'll call the police. I'm not ready to see anyone like this." Janice replied calmly. "We have a nurse coming here for 2 hours each day to care for you. You'll also have the best therapists in Texas to help you recover. Dr. Alexander will check on you twice a week, and you can choose how many visitors you want each day. Jack arranged all of this because he wants you to feel safe and comfortable while you heal." It was hard for her to show her displeasure with her face covered in bandages, but they could see her frustration. If Jack cares about me so much, why hasn't he visited me for weeks, or even this morning when he was at home? "Because you wouldn't let me near you or talk to me for the last few weeks," he said, standing in the doorway as if he had been waiting. "I did come to check on you this morning, but I thought it might upset you to see me, and I want to help you heal, not make things harder for you." Her lip trembled, and her green eyes sparkled with anger. Jack waited for her to respond. "I don't believe anything you're saying. I didn't believe what you wrote either, but I do remember every word you said when I returned. You can't stand me, and I feel the same way. April, I've learned a lot since that day. I regret everything I said back then. If being angry with me helps you cope each day, I accept that you have every right to feel that way." "Oh, I'm not just angry, Jackson Earl Armstrong, I'm furious. Out of everyone I despise, you are at the very top. You left me and then turned against me. I felt horrible about what happened to me and what I did to protect you, hoping I could come back to you one day. But when I got here, I realized how hurtful you think I am. You're right, and I promise I won't bother you after this. But you need to know that there is a big reward for you and Janice. They don't know about the book you two wrote. When King finds out, he will make it even more valuable. The ranch is as safe as it can be, but the base security makes it hard to keep you safe there. I'll give you space, and everyone else will too unless you want them around. You'll get the care you need, and Janice and Carl are here to support you. Besides me, it's a perfect setup." She opened her mouth to respond, but he interrupted her. Sorry to interrupt, but yelling can make your face hurt more, and we don't want that pretty face to have scars. So why don't you come down and eat? If not, Janice will bring your coffee and breakfast back here. Thanks for listening to me, and I hope you feel better soon. He turned and walked away. April then looked at Janice, ready to protest, but Janice said, He's right. Your face is starting to bleed. Let me help you meet Nurse Rawlins, and she can take care of your wounds. After that, would you like to eat in the kitchen or here? Days were getting longer, but time felt like it was moving quickly when there was so much to do. They needed every moment to finish preparations before the expected trouble, but the mix of urgency and worry made the long summer days seem endless. By the summer solstice, their defense plans were in place and stretched well beyond the ranch's boundaries. The city and county had worked on improving a runway for private jets belonging to wealthy owners and famous visitors. It was 8,000 feet long and 100 feet wide, making it suitable for all types of aircraft, including the A-10 Thunderbolt, also known as the Warthog. They set up tarps and netting at an unused dirt runway at the airport, with hardtop extending from the largest tarps to the concrete runway. It was more than a mile from the main road and surrounded by bushes, so it was hidden from sight. Anyone from nearby ranches who noticed them was told it was all part of the state and federal efforts to stop drug smuggling and human trafficking. That explanation was used to account for various unusual activities in Cow County and nearby areas. Enhanced efforts covered things like helicopters, state troopers staying in a motel, planes flying overhead at night, and trucks moving to the Armstrong Ranch late at night. The Armstrong family, local law enforcement, and federal officers were surprised that so much was being done to protect a few ordinary people. But Captain Cross was not. He told everyone with that thought the same thing. You have it all wrong. This isn't just about a few civilians. This is about national security. Armed groups from private companies funded by an enemy nation are planning to come into our country to harm Americans. If they succeed, other countries will see the USA as weak, which may lead to more troubles. This, he said, pointing to the large area of the ranch filled with security systems, is where the Department of State, the Department of Defense, and the executive branch are making a strong statement. If any groups come onto American land and attack us, we will do everything we can to stop them and hold those responsible accountable. The Armstrongs, however, had their own ideas about dealing with the King of K Street and his allies. They would prefer to take matters into their own hands. Jack especially doubted that Daniel King would ever face justice. He knew too much about what had happened in the past to be caught. If it looked like he might be arrested, he would likely find a way to escape, even if it cost a lot of money. As days went by, life settled into a routine. Jack and Carl managed the ranch and its operations, while April and Janice worked on their video diaries whenever April was not in therapy. Delta Cross kept improving the security systems. People in Cowtown noticed the increase in law enforcement and military presence and realized that something was happening at the Armstrong Ranch. They worried for Janice, April, and Jack. Conversations buzzed about the reasons behind this, but they agreed to be careful around outsiders. The saying their grandparents used from World War II, "Loose lips sink ships," was still in their minds, and they made plans to handle curious strangers. The sheriff, Banker Williams, and his wife might have shared some concerns with a few close friends, but the usual caution in their small town was the main reason for the extra alertness. Weeks passed. April's bandages were removed, and visitors assured her that only small marks from her injuries were left. As she improved, the focus of her therapy shifted from rehabilitation to regaining her strength and balance, allowing her to walk gracefully. Despite her progress, she kept to herself, only seen when moving between her room and other areas or going to therapy. She ate her meals at a table set up in the master suite, where she enjoyed brief talks with her server, Chita Garcia. With many people living and working on the ranch day and night, Chita, Juanita, and her sister, Scylla, Lucilla, were hired to prepare meals and manage the kitchen. There is little doubt they witnessed things they should not have, but their dedication to their job and the Armstrong family was unwavering. They remained in the car when they arrived home. 2 months after April returned to the ranch, she decided to step out from her solitude. For her first appearance, she chose to join everyone for the evening meal. She wore a lovely blue sundress, white sandals, light makeup, and had her hair tied back, which showed off her lovely neck and shoulders with no visible scars. She walked to the table with confidence, took a seat next to Janice, and smiled her charming smile that had always drawn others in. For those who may not know her, this is my best friend and sister-in-law, April Armstrong. She's also called Captain Marvel for her bravery and because she resembles Carol Danvers. Isn't she beautiful? Everyone agreed with applause. She has fully recovered and no longer needs to stay active for her health, which is amazing for someone who once faced a terrible experience defending her home. She is an American hero not only for her brave actions, but also for enduring a difficult time with some very bad people who are still out there. We appreciate your support during this time. I know you all will show her the respect she deserves. However, she may not be aware of that. So please introduce yourselves before we eat and take a moment to get to know her in the coming days. In a routine that would happen many times that week, each man introduced himself, shared what he did at the ranch, and promised to visit her soon. She thanked each man by name and welcomed the chance to chat. Knowing what to expect, Carl took everything in stride. Jack, on the other hand, looked confused from the moment she arrived until she left after dinner. He knew this version of April well. She was the woman he once loved, married, and hoped to start a family with. However, seeing her charm everyone around her without acknowledging him felt very different, especially since he thought she was still recovering. He had kept himself busy with work and preparations, sticking to his promise to give her space, but he was surprised by how she suddenly looked and acted. Once she was out of sight, he shot a glance at Janice. She just smiled, and Carl chuckled. "Is something bothering you, Jack? You barely ate." Jack turned his glare to Carl, who laughed back. As he faced his sister again, he noticed that Captain Cross, Lieutenant Dan, Wash, Red, Alfred, Croc, and Top Kick were all smiling too. "She's a beautiful woman, Jack," Lieutenant Dan remarked. "We know you're going through a divorce. Can we give it a try? I may not be in the Army, but I can tell when I'm being caught off guard, so no thanks to all of you. She says she'll never talk to me again, so go ahead and try." With that, he got up and left, his friends' loud laughter following him. He got into his truck and drove around his land, then took a ride by the river. He came back 3 hours later with a new outlook and a plan. He needed to take action. He would review the information from King's servers and the almost finished video journal. While Janice and April recalled various details that Renee said could help in taking action against those responsible, they organized their thoughts and added them to the end of the journal. This made it feel unfinished, but Jack thought it was ready. With solid facts from 2 different sources to think about, he would make a smart choice about his future with April and present it to her, whatever that might be. Then she could choose her own path, whether with him or someone else. Either way, he knew this situation had to change. He could stay in the same house with her but respect her desire for space. The April who had everyone's attention at the table? That wouldn't work anymore. It was time to make a decision. Sue and the Croc were in the basement, living off soft drinks, candy, and the occasional meal they had to attend. They stayed in close contact with Mule, who had been quietly asked to help them by someone high up in the military. Her connections were making their work easier. Their focus was on 2 things: what was happening with Daniel King, and how soldiers were being moved into the U.S. through airports and shipping centers worldwide. This last task needed support from the State Department, which had been put on a higher alert. That was useful, but even being classified as top secret couldn't stop some information from leaking out among the many people at the State Department and Terrorist Screening Center. So far, no one had shared the latest information with King or the PMC, but they knew it would reach them eventually. Sue, Croc, and Mule quickly informed their supervisors if they caught anyone in their nets. Still, they felt certain that some news about their efforts was slipping through unnoticed. They were also sure more mercenaries were coming in without being detected. Tagging the 2 PMCs as a suspected terrorist organization by the official government agencies had been quite helpful for identification and tracking. However, this action caused some trouble. Although it was meant to be kept secret, the Russian government protested the label just a few days later. They were now on a quest to find out which spies or careless workers had let that information slip. The local efforts related to Daniel King and his known associates proved to be more productive than what the Department of Justice was doing. The DOJ had obtained secret warrants for surveillance that included phone calls and messages. A select team from the DOJ had been chosen, and so far, the trio had seen no signs that King was aware of the investigation. To cover themselves, they were listed as contractors, but they operated beyond the boundaries of the warrants. The saying about the best-laid plans came to mind, affecting Jack's commitment to watch the videos and decide on his next steps. It was late July. The crops were ready to be harvested and the cattle had not been worked or moved during the spring. The market calves were too big now. They needed to grease the windmill, fix 2 fences, and refill the pesticides in the dust bags to keep flies away from the cattle. When the irrigation system broke in the summer heat, they spent 2 days fixing that. Nothing unusual happened, just the usual summer work on the ranch, but it kept Jack and Carl busy most days, which wasn't all bad. The work gave Jack a good reason to skip meals with April and her guests, which were starting to wear on him. She came to the table every day dressed for a party and enjoyed the attention of the more than 20 men who sat with her over 2 meal shifts. Though she ate very little, she tried to stand out, almost like she was in a contest for attention. Jack grew tired of the situation quickly. He decided to have breakfast early. He told the Garcia girls he would come by to pick up his lunch during a break from his work on the ranch. He also asked them to leave his dinner in the microwave if he wasn't back when they left. He still saw his wife occasionally. She was in the gym for therapy or watching TV in the living area or chatting with his sister and some men. But as she had asked, he gave her space. Each evening, after finishing up his tasks, he met with Alfred and Charlie. However, he stayed away from the planning and organizing of their defenses. Instead, he focused on finding weaknesses in Daniel King's operation. He brainstormed ways to take action against him. Unfortunately, there were no clear weaknesses, so he had no solid plans, but he kept searching. Soon, it was time for the contract workers to harvest the corn. He and Carl prepared the stalks and leaves after the harvest. Once they finished, they cut and baled the watered and fertilized grass into round bales, loaded them onto trucks using the front loader on the tractor, and placed them in the fenced hay area. The weather forecast suggested a hot spell over Texas, with temperatures reaching 108 to 112 degrees, feeling even hotter. This was typical for South Texas, but such heat wore down everyone working outside. Even Captain Cross was feeling irritable. Eventually, the heat moved to Arizona, leaving Texas with slightly cooler temperatures, just under 100 degrees. A breeze from the Gulf made it feel nicer outside and lifted everyone's spirits. Cowboys were ready for the late roundup. They looked forward to the traditional celebration after handling the calves and taking care of the cattle. Carl had picked out a steer, which he was feeding separately. This steer would be a special dish for the cowboys and their guests, including family and friends. Jack hadn't seen much of his sister or wife because he was away from home all day. When he did see them, they always looked nice and put together. He wondered where they got their clothes since he had donated April's outfits, and Janice had only a few items left in the guest room. Then he noticed boxes from various clothing stores in the recycling bin, which surprised him. Maybe it was time to check his credit cards and bank accounts when he found a moment and some energy. But even if he looked at everything, what was the point of arguing? They were staying in his home as his guests, and he had given April everything, so he felt responsible for her. And then there were his actions and words to consider. They had been rounding up the cattle all week, but some were hiding in the bushes by the river. So he joined Carl and Jose on horseback the next morning. They left just after sunrise and came back a couple of hours after lunch with a small group of lost cows. The men were sweaty, dirty, and tired. Wearing boots, leather chaps, and hats in the hot July weather was not a choice, but a necessity. Even then, the thorny bushes would snag at them and cause some cuts. The mix of military and law enforcement officers on duty watched with interest as the tired, dusty cowboys drove the noisy herd into the empty pen, closed the gate, and dismounted. They took off the saddles and blankets from their sweating horses, washed them, and let them roam in the pen with food and water. With no one around, the 3 men took off their jackets, chaps, and hats, hanging them on a fence to dry in the sun. They then climbed a ladder into a large open tank to enjoy a few minutes in the cool water. Since they were speaking Spanish, not many understood them, but it seemed like they were having a good time. After they finished, they climbed out and walked barefoot toward their rooms, washing their feet in the grass before entering. Jack felt completely worn out, but also awake and happy. It had been a long time since he worked on horseback, and it felt great. His lean, sun-kissed look did not go unnoticed by those watching, including his estranged wife, who was at a nearby window. She should have guessed he would go to shower in the guest bedroom, but she hesitated for a moment, thinking about what she saw and how it made her feel. Surprised when the door opened and he walked in wearing only his wet underwear, she gasped and covered her mouth, staring in disbelief. Jack seemed unfazed and met her gaze without looking away, recognizing her look went beyond surprise. "Well, fancy seeing you here, April. Need help with my shower?" She stayed frozen, hand over her mouth, but her eyes moved quickly over him before returning to his face. He took a moment to look her over, too, more slowly and obviously. She looked fit and healthy in her light exercise shorts and tank top. She had been working out several times a day as part of a plan from her therapists to help her get stronger and more flexible. Her facial scars were barely noticeable under her tan, even though she had no makeup on, and her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. If he didn't know any better, he might have thought she looked just like the sweet girl next door or someone he cared about deeply. But he did know, yet he still felt that familiar sense of connection. Jack stood in front of the door that April wanted to pass through. "Please let me out," she said, her voice showing some worry as she took a small step towards him. He smiled and moved slightly to the side, giving her enough space to slip by, then waved toward the open area. She turned sideways to pass him, but he put his hand on the doorframe and said with a grin, "Since I don't see you much and you don't talk to me when I do, let me take this chance to remind you about the roundup on Friday and the party that night. Carl and Jose are preparing the food, and Cheetah and Scylla are handling everything else, but we'd love your help, as well as Janice's, during the roundup and while setting up in the shed. I know you remember how we used to do it, and it would be great if you two could keep the cowboys refreshed and fed during the day. The captain has agreed to send some men to help load the pickup and set up the shed for the meal and dancing. I told him to talk to you about it. If you'd rather not, I can get some of the cowboy wives involved, and I'll ask Berta to lead it." Avoiding his gaze and showing some irritation, she replied, "Janice and I were confused about what we should do, or if we were still welcomed. Since you're asking, we would like to help again. However, we will need a lot of assistance tomorrow to prepare and organize the shed. When will you clear out the tractors? The shed will be empty by breakfast. You know where the ice coolers are, and Bud Allen will bring ice before dawn on Friday. We have cases of water and Gatorade ready by the coolers, and Abraham will have men load everything when you're ready to go to the pastures. The west pasture is finished, so we'll begin with the northern section and move east. The bulls in the southwest corner will be last, but we only need a few men for that, so most of us will focus on the pens. Since it's later in the year, we'll follow the fall vaccination plan. We'll be checking, tagging, branding, and treating the calves, then sorting them. You know how the fall routine goes, so just keep an eye on everyone. It would be very hot by then, and they didn't want anyone getting sick, so they needed to keep everyone hydrated from morning until night. But you already know this. Is there anything else you want me to organize? She asked. Not for the main event, but what about the party? Do you have everything you need? He replied. As I said, Carl and Jose will be cooking the calf overnight. Scylla and Cheetah are in charge of the rest of the food and drinks. The kegs will arrive around 5. Can you get some of the Delta guys to help with chilling the soft drinks and juice for the kids, set up the big fans, and anything else you need? You've got them wrapped around your finger, so that should be easy. She noticed a hint of jealousy in his tone, which made her look up. She saw the smile lines around his eyes and the playful twist of his mouth. It was hard to tell if he was jealous or just teasing her. She firmly pushed his hand aside and said, "Don't worry, we'll handle our part. We didn't forget everything while we were away." She walked past him and he thought, "No, just your upbringing and promises." This made him feel guilty for not keeping up with the videos and audio like he promised. Maybe he was wrong about that. After all, the intention behind an action matters. Shooting an AR-15 on a target range or to protect your home may involve similar actions, but your intention decides if those actions are good, necessary, or harmful. He needed to consider this, but he had important tasks first. Sorting out his thoughts would have to wait a few more days. Thursday morning was spent feeding cattle, closing gates to keep the groups in their pastures, and organizing supplies for the events on Friday. After a sandwich lunch, Carl worked on the parking area while using the utility tractor to rake and clear-cut grass and thorns. This area would soon be filled with vehicles and trailers, and they didn't want any flat tires. Janice and April were busy moving around, usually with 2 or more Delta Cross men, always including Lieutenant Dan and often Josh Abbott. Carl went to talk with them while Jack was working, but they never approached Jack. He picked up the grass piles with the front loader and moved them to a spot where they would burn them when it was safe to do so. The veterinarian stopped by with medications, syringes, and needles, so Jose and Bud Allen organized them in the barn refrigerator. They also needed to prepare the ear tags and applicators, branding tools, and make sure everything was ready for the animals. Tomorrow might not be a good day if we forget anything important or if things go wrong. Janice and April were waiting for Jack and Clay when they came in for a late dinner. "We let the Garcia girls go a bit early since they have to be here by 5:30 in the morning," Janice said. "But we saved you each a plate. I'll warm them up now and we can chat about tomorrow while you eat. What would you like to drink?" Carl smiled. "An ice-cold beer, please. I need to wash out all this dirt before I can even eat. Digging with the backhoe in the wind and helping Jose with the fire has made me really thirsty." "Yeah, I'll have a beer too, thanks," Jack said. They quickly finished their beers and received another round as the microwave beeped. Red sand covered their faces from where their straw hats had sat all day. Their hair was damp and wavy, and their clothes had stains from sweating. The bandanas around their necks were still wet, and they didn't smell very nice. Janice chuckled and took April's arm. "Let's sit over here as far away from the smell as we can while still being able to talk. These boys really should have gone for a swim before coming inside." April laughed as she sat down, seemingly lost in thought. "Yeah, I almost forgot about that. There's nothing quite like the smell of diesel, dust, and sweat to remind you of seeing your husband after a long day's work." Jack paused mid-bite to look at her, noticing the surprised look on his sister's face just before the meaning of her words hit April. She blushed under her tan, and Carl jumped in to lighten the mood. "You two didn't exactly smell like flowers when I talked to you in the barn, either. How many baths did it take for you to get clean? I'm going to need at least one more than that, and Jack probably needs 2. He really needs a wash. I can barely eat sitting this close to him." His casual way of speaking helped ease April's embarrassment, and she took the chance to fire back. "You aren't smelling like a flower garden either. I'm not sure whose smell is worse." "All right, enough of that. What did you want to discuss?" Jack asked, chuckling slightly. "Timing and specific plans," Janice replied. "Don't forget we've been away for a while, and this is the first time we're mixing the spring and fall roundups. When will the workers arrive, and when do you think you'll be in the north section and the east pastures? Who will be helping? We need to know the same for the working pens. If we're expected to have snacks and drinks ready, we need a head count and timeline." Carl answered casually. "We leave at first light around 6 a.m. Not everyone will be present by then, but once everyone is ready, we should have 13 cowboys and 2 cowgirls, which adds up to 17, a good number for now until we get a final count. There are some skilled hands among us, but it's tough to say when we'll have the northern area cleared. Maybe in 3 to 4 hours. The eastern sections are less overgrown and those cows are older, but we won't have as many people working there, so maybe another 2 to 3 hours for both areas. I'll stay with the roundup until all the cattle are gathered, including the bulls, but Jack and half the crew will head to the pens with the first group. Dr. Huff is expected to help check the animals and see what they need. With 11 vaccines to give, ears to tag, and branding to do, it's going to be busy and dusty, so plan to come back now and then." "What about lunch?" April asked. "Same as always, something you can eat on horseback or between the cattle pens?" The 2 men nodded, and Carl stood up from the table. "Sounds good. I'm exhausted, and morning is almost here. Unless you have questions for me, I'm heading to shower and bed. No? Okay, then sleep well and don't let the bugs bite see you early in the morning." "Yeah, I need to shower for about an hour too. Anything else, ladies?" "Yes. Please be patient with us tomorrow and be ready to help answer any questions we have, April replied. Like Janice said, it's been a while since we've done this. I know. It will be fine. And thank you for taking this on. You'll be the most popular people here tomorrow, and you might want to check with the guys hiding under the camo netting. They have their own supplies, but two friendly faces offering cold drinks will be a nice surprise. Park a little ways off and ask. You don't want to reveal their spots by driving right up to them, but I'm sure they'll appreciate the drinks and snacks. Good night, and thanks again. Jack walked toward his bedroom but turned to the basement when he reached the door. Everything all right? Are we still on for tomorrow? Captain Cross gave him a thumbs up and said, I'm looking forward to this. A city guy like me joining a cattle roundup. My friends will be so jealous. We'll see how excited you are tomorrow when we're up to our knees in brush and thorns, trying to guide stubborn cows and unruly calves toward the pens. You'll look and smell as rough as I do now, so get some good rest. See you at 4:45. Time to get moving. Sue and the Croc were in the basement, living on snacks and the meals they had to join for. They kept in close contact with Mule, who had been quietly assigned to assist them by someone high up in the military, making their efforts even better. Efforts focused on 1. Events involving Daniel King, and 2. The careful movement of private military company PMC soldiers into the U.S. through airports and shipping centers worldwide. To help with this, the State Department was on high alert. While this was useful, being labeled top secret did not stop some information from leaking among the many workers at the State Department and the Terrorist Screening Center. So far, it seemed this information had not reached King or the PMC, but they knew it would eventually. Sue, Croc, and Mule quickly informed their supervisors if they caught someone, but they sensed some details about the operation were slipping through. They also believed that more soldiers were entering than were being caught. A key part of identifying and tracking these soldiers was labeling the two PMCs as suspected terrorist organizations by certain government agencies. However, this designation caused a stir when the Russian government protested it just days later. Now, there was a search for the people responsible for the leak. The events involving Daniel King and his known associates yielded better results locally than at the Department of Justice, DOJ, which had received secret permits for surveillance, including monitoring phone calls. A special team from the DOJ was assigned to this, and so far, the trio had not seen any signs that King had been warned. To stay safe, they were registered as contractors, but they often went beyond the limits of their permits. The saying, "The best laid plans of mice and men often go astray," came to mind as Jack tried to decide the best way to watch and analyze the videos. In late July, the crops were ripe and needed harvesting. The cattle had not been worked or moved in the spring, and the young calves had grown too much. A windmill needed oiling, 2 fences needed fixing, and the cattle required new pesticides to fend off the flies. When the irrigation system broke in the summer heat, they spent 2 days fixing it. Nothing unusual occurred, just the routine work of the ranch, but it kept Jack and Carl busy most of the day, which was not entirely bad. The work allowed Jack to avoid meals at the table with April and her admirers, which had begun to wear on him. She dressed for dinner every day and enjoyed the attention from the more than 20 men who came to eat over 2 shifts, for both of which she was seated. She didn't eat much, but she made sure everyone noticed her like she was trying to be popular. Jack quickly became tired of all that, so he had breakfast early. He told the Garcia girls he would come by to grab his lunch when he had a break from working on the ranch. He asked them to put his dinner in the microwave if he wasn't back by the time they left. He still saw his estranged wife occasionally. She would be exercising in the gym, watching TV in the common area, or talking with his sister or groups of men, but he respected her wish to be left alone. Every evening after cleaning up, he met with Alfred and Charlie. However, he stayed out of the planning for the defensive efforts. Instead, his sharp mind focused on finding weaknesses in Daniel King's operations to devise plans to confront the situation. He didn't see any clear weaknesses, so he continued brainstorming. Then came the time for the contractors to harvest the corn, and he and Carl gathered up the stalks and leaves. Once they finished that, they cut and baled the fertilized grass into round bales, loaded them onto trucks with the tractor, and stored them in a fenced area. The weather reports warned about extreme heat over Texas, with temperatures reaching 108,112 degrees, and feels like temperatures hitting 115,120. This wasn't unusual for South Texas, but the heat was tiring, and everyone working outside felt the pressure. Even Captain Cross was feeling the strain. Eventually, the heat moved to Arizona, leaving Texas with temperatures just below 100 degrees. The breeze from the Gulf made it more comfortable outside, and everyone's mood improved. The cowboys lined up for the late roundup were promised a traditional celebration after they tagged the calves and took care of the cattle. Carl had set aside an 800-pound steer to be fed in a separate pen. This steer would be the special meal for the cowboys, local law enforcement, family, and friends. Jack hadn't seen much of his sister or wife during the day since he was out of the house, but when he did catch glimpses of them, they always looked well-dressed and put together. He wondered where their clothes came from since he had given April's away, and Janice only had a few items in the guest room. Then he noticed boxes from online stores in the recycling bin. Maybe it was time to check his credit card statements and bank accounts when he had the opportunity. But even if he found out the details, he thought about whether it was worth arguing. They were staying at his home as guests, and since he had donated all of April's things, he felt he owed it to her. And then there were his actions and words to consider. They had spent the week gathering cattle into pens, but some were still hiding in the bushes near the river. So the next morning, he joined Carl and Jose on horseback. They left just after sunrise and returned a few hours after lunch with the noisy strays. The men were sweaty and dirty. Wearing boots, leather chaps, and hats in late July was not a choice but a necessity. Even then, the thorny bushes sometimes scratched them, leaving marks. The mixed group of military and law enforcement officers watched as the tired men herded the shouting cattle into the empty pen, closed the gate, and got off their horses. They removed the sweaty saddles, hung them on a rail to dry, washed their horses, and let them roam in a pen with plenty of food and water. Acting as if no one was watching, the three men took off their jackets, chaps, and hats, draped them over a fence to dry, and climbed up a ladder into a storage tank to enjoy a few moments in the cool water. They chatted happily in Spanish, which not many understood. A few minutes later, they climbed out and walked barefoot toward their quarters, washing their feet in the grass before heading inside. Jack felt exhausted yet delighted. It had been a long time since he had worked on a horse, and he loved it. He was lean and tanned from weeks of outdoor work, which didn't go unnoticed by those watching, including his estranged wife, who peeked in from a window. She knew he would head to the bathroom in the guest room he was using. However, she hesitated for a moment, thinking about what she saw and how it made her feel. When the door opened and he walked in wearing just his wet underwear, she gasped, covered her mouth, and stared. Jack seemed unfazed. He looked back at her without blinking, noticing a look in her eyes that was more than just surprise. "Fancy seeing you here, April. Are you here to help with my shower?" She stood frozen, hand over her mouth, her eyes quickly scanning him before locking back onto his. Since she was looking at him, he took the moment to observe her as well, but he did so slowly. She looked healthy, fit, and sun-kissed in her light white workout shorts and tank top. She had been exercising several times a day as part of the plan her therapists created to help her get stronger, more flexible, and move with grace. The scars on her face were hard to see under the tan, even with no makeup, and her hair was pulled back into a messy ponytail. If he didn't know better, he would think she looked like a pretty girl next door. He did know better, but he still felt that familiar sense of recognition. Jack stood in the doorway that April urgently needed to pass through. "Please let me out," she said, her voice almost panicked, as she took a careful step toward him. He smiled and moved aside, giving her just enough space to get by, then pointed to the open path. April turned to squeeze past him, but he placed a hand on the door frame, grinning as he said, "Since I rarely see you and you don't talk to me when I do, let me take this chance to remind you about Friday's gathering and the celebration that night. Carl and Jose will be cooking, while Cheetah and Scylla are in charge of the food. We could really use your help, and Janice's during the gathering and in setting up the shed. I know you remember how we did it before, and it would be great if you two could help keep everyone refreshed and fed until we're done. The captain is sending men to help with loading the truck and preparing the shed for the meal and dancing, so I told him to talk to you. If you don't want to help, that's fine. I can ask some of the cowboys' wives to step in and get Berta to lead it." She still kept her eyes away from him and replied, slightly annoyed. "Janice and I weren't sure about what we were supposed to do, or if we were even wanted. But since you're asking, we would like to help like we used to. We will need quite a bit of support tomorrow to get everything ready. When will you clear out the tractors?" "The shed will be clear by breakfast. You know where the ice coolers are, and Bud Allen is bringing ice before dawn on Friday. There are cases of water and sports drinks stacked by the coolers, and Abraham will have men load everything when you're ready to head to the fields. The western pasture is finished, so we'll start working on the north section next. The bulls in the southwest corner will be last, needing only a few men since most of us will be working in the pens. Since it's late in the year, we're going with the fall vaccinations. We'll be checking, tagging, branding, and treating the calves, then sorting them. You know the fall routine well, so just keep an eye on the guys. It will be very hot by then, and we don't want people getting sick, so they should drink plenty of water throughout the day." "But you already know that. Is there anything else you need me to do or prepare?" "Not for the roundup, but what about the party? Do you have all the supplies?" she replied. "As I said, Carl and Jose will be cooking the calf overnight. Scylla and Cheetah are in charge of the rest of the food and drinks. The kegs will arrive around 5. Get some of the Delta guys to help you chill the soft drinks and juice for the kids. Set up the big fans and anything else you need. You've got everyone supporting you already, so that should be easy." She noticed a hint of jealousy in his words. Looking up, she saw the smile around his eyes and the playful look on his face. It was hard to tell if he was jealous or just having fun with her. She straightened her mouth, pushed his hand away, and said, "Don't worry, we'll handle our part. We didn't forget everything while we were back east." She walked past him, and he thought, "No, just your upbringing and promises." That thought made him feel guilty for not watching the videos and listening to the audio as he had promised. Maybe he was overthinking it. Intent mattered. Hitting a target at a shooting range, defending your home from an attacker, or firing into a crowd all involved similar actions. It was your intent that determined if those actions were right, necessary, or something more serious. He needed to know, but the roundup came first. Figuring all of this out would have to wait a few more days. Thursday morning was spent feeding cattle, closing gates to keep each group in the right area, and organizing supplies for the events on Friday. After a sandwich lunch, Carl worked on the parking area, clearing cut grass and thorns with the utility tractor. This area would soon be filled with trucks and horse trailers, and no one wanted flat tires. They saw Janice and April busy around the place, often accompanied by 2 or more Delta Cross men, including Lieutenant Dan and sometimes Josh Abbott. Carl went to chat with them while Jack continued raking, but they never approached Jack. He used the front loader to gather piles of debris and moved them to the brush pit, where they would be burned when it was safe. The vet stopped by with supplies, so Jose and Bud Allen were organizing the medications, syringes, and needles in the barn refrigerator. They also had to prepare the ear tags, branding irons, oil, mops, and check the squeeze chutes. Tomorrow was not a day for mistakes or forgetting things. Janice and April were waiting for Jack and Clay when they came in for a late dinner. "We let the Garcia girls leave early since they need to be here by 5:30 in the morning," Janice said. "But we saved you each a plate. I'll warm them up now and we can talk about tomorrow while you eat. What do you want to drink?" Carl smiled and said, "An ice-cold beer, please. I've got quite a bit of dirt to wash down before I can eat. Digging with the backhoe and helping Jose with the fire has left me really thirsty." "Yeah, beer is good for me too, thanks," Jack added. They quickly drank their cold beers and were offered another one just as the microwave beeped. Red dust covered their faces from under their straw hats. Their hair was wet and wavy, their shirts and jeans were stained from sweat, and their bandanas were still damp. They definitely had an odor of the long day's work. Janice giggled and took April's arm. "Let's sit over here, away from the smell, so we can still talk. These boys needed a swim before coming in." April laughed as she sat down, almost lost in thought. "Yeah, I forgot about that. Nothing like the smell of hard work when you see your husband after a long day." Jack paused to look at her, noticing how his sister seemed surprised by her own words. April flushed a bit, and Carl chimed in to ease the moment. You both didn't smell like flowers when I saw you in the barn either. How many washes did it take to get clean? Because I think I'll need one more than that, and Jack will need two. He really smells a lot. I can hardly eat sitting this close. His light-hearted tone helped April recover, and she teased back. You don't smell like flowers either. Who knows whose smell is worse? All right, enough of the joking. What did you want to discuss with us? Jack interrupted, chuckling a bit. Timing and plans, Janice replied. You may have forgotten, but we haven't been around for a while, and this is the first time we're combining the spring and fall roundups. When will the workers arrive? When do you plan to be in the north and east pastures? And who will be there? The same goes for the working pens. If we're expected to have drinks and snacks ready, we need a rough head count and timeline. Carl replied casually. We leave at first light, around 6 a.m. Not everyone will be here by then, but when they are all ready, we should have 13 cowboys and 2 ranch hands, so 17 is a good number until we count everyone. There are some skilled riders among us, but we don't know exactly when we'll clear the north area, maybe 3 to 4 hours. The sections on the east are clearer, but they have older cows. There won't be as many people to help, so maybe another 2 to 3 hours to finish both. I'll stay with the roundup until all the cattle are gathered, but Jack and half the crew will head to the pens with the first group. Dr. Huff should be here to help check the animals and tell us what needs to be done. With 11 vaccines to give, ears to tag, and branding to do, it's going to be a busy, dusty day, so expect to take turns checking back. What about lunch? April asked. Same as always, whatever you can eat while on horseback or between pens? The 2 men nodded, and Carl moved back from the table. Sounds good. I'm exhausted, and dawn is almost here. Unless you have any questions for me, I'm heading to shower and bed. No? Well, sleep well and see you early in the morning. Yeah, I need to shower for a bit too. Anything else, ladies? Yes. Please be patient with us tomorrow and be available to answer any questions we might have, April replied. Like Janice said, it's been a while since we did this. I know, it will be fine, and thanks for stepping up. You'll be the most popular people on the ranch tomorrow. You might want to check with the guys under the camo netting. I know they have their own supplies, but a couple of friendly faces offering cold drinks are always appreciated. Stay a little away and ask them. You don't want to give their spots away, but I bet they'll enjoy the drinks and snacks. Good night, and thanks again. Jack headed toward his bedroom, but turned to the basement when he got to the door. Everything okay? Are we still on for tomorrow? Captain Cross gave him a thumbs up and said, I'm excited. A city boy like me taking part in a cattle roundup. My friends will be so jealous. We'll see how excited you are tomorrow when we're deep in bushes, trying to move stubborn cows and wild calves toward the pens. You'll look and smell just like I do right now, so get a good night's rest. See you at 4:45. Sue and the Croc were in the basement surviving on soda, candy, and occasional meals. They were in close contact with Mule, who had been quietly sent to assist them from someone important in the military, and her help was making things easier. Efforts focused on 2 main areas. Things happening around Daniel King and the organized movement of private military contractors into the U.S. through airports and shipping centers worldwide. This movement required help from the State Department, which was on high alert. While this was useful, even top-secret information sometimes leaked from the many people at the State Department and the Terrorist Screening Center. So far, this information had not reached King or the private military contractors, but they knew it likely would soon. Sue, Croc, and Mule quickly informed their supervisors if they caught someone suspicious, but they were certain that some details were slipping through. They were also sure more contractors were entering the country unnoticed. A significant help in identifying and tracking these contractors was that 2 groups had been labeled as suspected terrorist organizations by the relevant government agencies. However, this decision also clarified that even secret actions could leak out, as the Russian government raised concerns about the label just days later. They began searching for the individuals responsible for the leak. The other effort, which involved events related to Daniel King and his known associates, had more success locally than at the Department of Justice, DOJ. The DOJ had received secret orders for surveillance, including monitoring phone calls and messages. A small team was assigned to this task, and so far it seemed that King had not been given any warnings. To protect themselves, the trio was classified as contractors, but they often worked outside the limits of their orders. The saying, "the best laid plans of mice and men often go astray," applied to Jack as he planned to watch and analyze videos to decide his next steps. It was late July, and it was time to harvest crops and take care of the cattle, which hadn't been managed or moved to new pastures in the spring, making them too large for the market. A windmill needed greasing, 2 fences required repairs, and they needed to replace the pesticides in the dust bags and back rubbers to keep the flies away from the cattle. When the irrigation system broke in the summer heat, they spent 2 days fixing it. Nothing particularly exciting happened. It was just routine ranch work. However, it kept Jack and Carl busy most days, which was helpful. The work allowed Jack to avoid meals at the table with April and her admirers, which had become tiresome for him. She always dressed elegantly, as if for a special occasion, and enjoyed the attention of the many men who joined them for dinner. Though she ate very little, she made sure everyone noticed her, almost as if she was trying to be popular. Jack quickly got fed up with the scene, so he ate breakfast early. He told the Garcia girls he would come by for his lunch during a break from work and asked them to leave his dinner in the microwave if he wasn't back by the time they left. He still saw his estranged wife occasionally, whether she was in the gym working out, watching TV in the common area, or talking to his sister or groups of men. But as she had insisted, he let her have her space. Every evening after finishing his chores, he met with Alfred and Charlie, but he stayed out of the planning for defense strategies. Instead, his sharp mind looked for weaknesses in Daniel King's organization, trying to come up with plans to confront the threat. There were no clear weaknesses, so he struggled to find a solid plan, but he remained determined. Then it was time for the contract workers to harvest the corn, while he and Carl took care of the stalks and leaves. After that, they cut and baled the irrigated coastal Bermuda grass into round bales, loaded them onto trucks with the tractor, and stored them securely in the hay pen. The weathermen warned that a heat wave was settling over Texas, and the forecast showed no sign of it leaving. Temperatures were expected to hit between 108 and 112 degrees, with it feeling even hotter outside. While this was typical in South Texas, it still wore people down, making everyone who worked outdoors feel uneasy. Even Captain Cross was in a bad mood. Finally, the heat moved to Arizona, bringing Texas back to nearly 100-degree temperatures, with a breeze from the Gulf making it feel a bit better and lifting spirits. Cowboys were gathered for the late roundup, eager for the traditional celebration after branding the calves and taking care of the cattle. Carl had prepared an 800-pound steer to feed separately. This would be the main dish for the cowboys, their guests from the law enforcement, family, and friends. Jack didn't spend much time with his sister and wife since he was out all day, but they always looked nice when he saw them. He was puzzled about where their clothes came from because he had given away April's clothes, and Janice had only a few items in the guest room. Then he noticed boxes from various online clothing stores in the recycling bin. Maybe it was time to check his credit cards and bank accounts when he had a moment to spare. But even if he bought more clothes, what would be the point of arguing? They were living in his home as guests, and he had given April's things away, so he felt he needed to support her. And then there were his actions and words to consider. They had been gathering the cattle into pens all week, but some were still hiding in the bushes near the river. So, he joined Carl and Jose on horseback the next morning. They left just after sunrise and returned a few hours after lunch with the small herd of wandering cattle. The men were sweaty, dirty, and a bit scraped up. Wearing boots, leather pants, jackets, and hats in late July was necessary because the thorny bushes could easily snag them and cause discomfort. The mix of military and law enforcement officers on duty were impressed by the worn, tired cowboys who drove the noisy herd into the pen, closed the gate, and got off their horses. They took off the saddles from the tired horses, laid the blankets and saddles on a wooden railing to dry, brushed the horses, and let them loose in the pen with plenty of feed and water. As if no one was watching, the 2 men and the young cowboy removed their heavy clothes and hung them over the fence to dry in the sun. They climbed a ladder into the open-top water tank to cool off for a few moments. They spoke in Spanish, so not many understood them, but their tone sounded happy. After a few minutes, they got out and, still in their light clothing, walked barefoot toward their rooms, washing their feet in the grass before going inside. Jack felt tired but strangely excited. It had been too long since he had worked on horseback, and it felt good. He was lean and sun-kissed from working outside, and this did not go unnoticed by those around him, including his estranged wife who watched from a window. She should have guessed he would head to the bathroom to shower and change since it was in the guest bedroom he was using. However, she hesitated for a bit, thinking about what she saw and how it made her feel. When the door opened and her estranged husband stepped in wearing only his wet shorts, she exclaimed in surprise, covering her mouth with her hand and staring. Jack seemed unfazed. He met her gaze steadily and recognized that her expression was more than just surprise. "What a surprise to see you here, April. Are you here to help with my shower?" She stood frozen, hand over her mouth, her eyes darting over him before returning to his. He took a moment to look at her too, but in a more deliberate manner. She looked healthy and fit in her white exercise shorts and tank top. After all, she was working out several times a day as part of her therapist's plan to help her get stronger and more flexible. Her facial scars were barely noticeable under her tan, even without makeup. Her hair was pulled back into a messy ponytail. If he didn't know better, he would have thought she looked like his pretty young girlfriend. But he did know better, yet he still felt that familiar sense of recognition. Jack was standing in front of the door that April urgently needed to get through. "Please let me out," she said, her voice sounding a bit frantic as she stepped closer to him. He smiled and moved to the side, giving her enough space to pass. He then gestured for her to go ahead. As she tried to step by him, he placed his hand on the doorframe and grinned. "Since I rarely see you, and you don't talk to me when I do, let me take this chance to remind you about Friday's gathering and the party that night. Carl and Jose are cooking, while Cheetah and Scylla are managing the food. We could really use your help and Janice's during the gathering and with setting up in the shed. I know you remember how we did things before, and it would be great if you both could help keep everyone fed and hydrated until we're done." The captain agreed to provide some men to help with loading the truck and setting up for the meal and dancing. He will check with you about it. If you'd rather not help, I can ask some of the cowboys' wives to take charge, including Renee's wife, Berta. Looking down, a hint of annoyance in her eyes, she replied, "Janice and I weren't sure what we were supposed to do or if we were welcome. But since you've asked, yes, we'd be happy to help again. We'll need a lot of help tomorrow to prepare and get the shed ready. When will you move the tractors out?" "The shed will be cleared by breakfast. You know where the ice chests are, and Bud Allen will bring ice before dawn on Friday. There are cases of water and Gatorade by the ice chests. Abraham will have men ready to load everything when you're set to head to the pastures. The West River pasture is done, so we'll start on the northern section and move east. The bulls on the southwest corner will be last, but we'll only need a few men for that. Most of us will be working the pens. Since it's late in the year, we'll follow the fall vaccination schedule. We will be examining, tagging, branding, and caring for the calves, then sorting them. You know how it goes in the fall, so just keep an eye on everyone. It would be really hot by then, and we don't want anyone getting sick, so let's make sure they have something to drink all day long." "But you already know that. Is there anything else you need me to do or prepare?" she replied. "Not for the roundup, but what about the party? Do you have everything you need?" he asked. "Like I said, Carl and Jose will be cooking the calf overnight. Scylla and Cheetah are in charge of the rest of the food and tea, and the kegs will arrive around 5. Can you get some of the Delta guys to help chill the soft drinks and juice for the kids? Set up the big fans and whatever else you need," she explained. "You've got them eager to help you, so I'm sure it won't be a problem." She caught a hint of jealousy in his voice, which made her look up. She noticed the smile lines around his eyes and his teasing grin, but she wasn't sure if he was jealous or just having fun at her expense. She pushed his hand away and said, "Don't worry, we'll handle our part. We didn't forget everything while we were back east." She strode past him and he thought, "No, just your upbringing and promises." That thought made him feel guilty for not watching the videos and listening to the audio like he had promised. Maybe he was wrong about that. After all, intent matters. Firing a weapon at a target on a range or in defense of home and family is different from doing it in a crowd. It's the intent behind the action that determines if it's right, wrong, or somewhere in between. He had to figure that out, but he had the roundup to focus on first. Understanding it all would have to wait a few more days. Thursday morning was spent feeding cattle, shutting gates to keep each group in its own area, and organizing supplies for the Friday events. After a simple lunch, Carl worked on the parking area, using a tractor to clear away cut grass and thorns. Tomorrow, that area would be filled with trucks and trailers, and they needed to avoid flat tires. They noticed Janice and April busy running around, usually with a couple of the Delta Cross men, often including Lieutenant Dan and sometimes Josh Abbott. Carl went over to chat with them while Jack was working, but they didn't look for Jack. He continued picking up piles with the front loader and moving them to the brush pit, waiting for rain to make it safe to burn. The vet stopped by with the supplies, and Jose and Bud Allen were busy organizing them in the barn refrigerator. They needed to prepare the ear tags, branding tools, and check the squeeze chutes, making sure everything was ready for the next day. Tomorrow would be a tough day if anything important was overlooked or went wrong. Janice and April were waiting when Jack and Clay came in for a late dinner. "We let the Garcia girls leave early since they need to be here by 5:30 in the morning," Janice said. "But we saved you each a plate. I'll warm them up now and we can chat about tomorrow while you eat. What do you want to drink?" Carl smiled. "An ice-cold Lone Star, please. I really need to wash out all this dirt before I can eat. Digging the pit, working in the wind, and helping Jose build the fire has left me thirsty." "Yeah, I'll have a beer too, thanks," Jack added. They quickly finished their first drinks and got another round before the microwave beeped. Red sand covered their faces where their hats had been all day. Their hair was damp and wavy. Their shirts and jeans had sweat stains, and their bandanas were still wet, leaving a strong smell around them. Janice laughed and took April's arm. "Let's sit over here away from the smell and still be able to talk. These guys should have gone for a swim before they came in." April laughed too as she sat down, lost in thought. "I forgot that part. Nothing like the mix of diesel, dust, and sweat to make you feel even happier to see your husband after a long day of work." Jack paused to look at her and noticed his sister's surprised expression before April realized what she said. She turned red, but Carl jumped in to lighten the moment. "You two didn't smell like roses when I saw you in the barn either. How many baths did it take to get clean? 'Cause I'm going to need one more than that, and Jack will need two. He really isn't smelling great. It's hard to eat being this close to him." His playful tone helped ease April's embarrassment, and she took it as a chance to respond. "You're not exactly fresh either. I'm not sure whose smell is worse." "Okay, enough joking. What did you want to discuss with us?" Jack said with a laugh, though still serious. "Timing," Janice replied. "And some details. Remember, we've been away for a while, and this is the first time we've had both spring and fall roundups together. When will the workers arrive? When do you expect to be in the northern and eastern pastures? And who will be there? The same goes for the working pens. If we need to have drinks and snacks ready, we need a rough head count and schedule." Carl casually answered, "We leave at first light, around 6 a.m. Not everyone will be here yet, but when everyone is ready, we should have 13 cowboys and 2 cowgirls, plus the 2 others, so 17 is a good number for now until we get a proper count. We have some skilled folks among us, but it's still hard to say when we will clear the northern area. Maybe 3 to 4 hours. The sections to the east are not as thick with bushes and have older cattle, but there will be fewer people working there. It might take another 2 to 3 hours to finish both places. I will stay with the roundup until all the cattle are in, including the bulls. Jack and half the crew will go to the pens with the first group. Dr. Huff is supposed to come help check the livestock and see what needs to be done. But with 11 vaccines to give, tagging ears and branding, it will be a busy, dusty hotspot, so plan on coming back periodically. "What about lunch?" April asked. "The same as always, whatever you can eat while on horseback or between the pens?" The 2 men nodded, and Carl moved away from the table. "Sounds about right. I'm tired and dawn is close. Unless you have questions for me, I'm off to shower and bed. No? Okay, sleep well and don't let the bed bugs bite. See you early in the morning." "Yes, I need to shower for an hour myself. Is there anything else, ladies?" "Yes. Please be patient with us tomorrow and be ready to answer questions if we need to ask, April replied. Like Janice said, it's been a little while. I know, it will be fine, and thank you for stepping up. You'll be quite popular tomorrow, and you might want to check on the guys under the camo netting. They have their own supplies, but two friendly faces offering cold drinks are always nice. Park a bit away and ask. You don't want to give away their spots by getting too close, but I bet they will appreciate the drinks and snacks. Good night, and thanks again. Jack headed toward his bedroom, but turned to the basement when he reached the door. Is everything okay? Are we still on for tomorrow? Captain Cross gave him a thumbs up and said, I'm excited. A city guy like me taking part in a cattle roundup. My friends will be so envious. We'll see how excited you are tomorrow when we are knee-deep in bushes and prickly pear, trying to guide stubborn, loud cows and playful calves to the pens. You might end up looking and smelling as rough as I do right now, so get a good night's sleep. See you at 4:45. The nearly full moon provided enough light to saddle their horses at the pen. Abraham Cross, the Armstrong boys, Jose Montoya, and Bud Allen each had a cardboard cup of coffee and a clear view of the gate. They could see the lights from town and down the FM road, so they knew they would have a good turnout. Everyone who came was a friend, and they always helped each other during the roundup, so the turnout was not a surprise. But you never really know until it happens. Sheriff Rodriguez was the first to arrive through the open gate. He maneuvered his pickup and horse trailer into a parking spot where he could easily get out if needed. Then he walked over, leading his horse with one hand and holding his coffee with the other. Good morning, everyone. I can smell that delicious food cooking. Since I'm first, I get the first taste. As long as you don't back out at the last minute, I'll make sure you do, Carl replied. And let me give credit where it's due. Jose is the best when it comes to cooking in the ground pit. He has a special mix of woods he uses, and I'm not sure he even slept last night while looking after the fire. So no matter how it turns out, this is his feast. I can't speak for the taste yet, but it sure smells amazing, Bud added. 13 of the 17 expected riders left at 5:41. Bud stayed behind to help the other 3 who were with him, but needed to fix a flat tire on their old trailer. Before they entered the pasture, Jack reminded everyone to keep their distance from the camo-covered areas and to keep the cattle away from there, too. They did as they were told, but the men in camo watched them closely and waved back as the cowmen rode by. There were 62 cows in the north pasture, plus at least 53 calves. Carl thought there might be more hidden in the brush, as some were so big they looked like their mothers. Normally, Carl and Jack would count carefully and track every birth, but this year was different. The spring calving season had been unusual due to recent events and injuries. They had 5-month-old calves that hadn't been tagged or vaccinated yet. This year had been very dry, with only one heavy rain a few months ago, leaving the grass low in nutrition. They had managed to lure some cows out of the brush by spreading high-protein feed along the road. Josh Abbott drove the old ranch truck to the pasture after the cowboys had time to locate the cattle and move behind them. Once the cowboys were ready and started to push the herd, he directed the truck toward the pens, honked the horn, and used the feed spreader now and then to grab their attention. Hearing the horn and the sound of the spreader, more than half the herd came out of the brush and moved down the road to snack on the feed. The young calves soon felt the absence of their mother and the sound of food being spread out, and they moved to join the other animals on the road. The others were not as easy to handle, but once they got them together and moving, they quickly caught up with those already eating. Josh honked the horn as he drove toward the pens, with more than 100 cattle following him and 17 cowboys riding alongside. Jack checked his watch when he saw Janice and April coming toward them. The roundup was happening about 40 minutes earlier than Carl had expected. The cattle were moving toward the pens, so he stopped the riders and waited for the pickup truck, known as the beverage cart, and its 2 helpers. The 2 helpers parked the truck and climbed into the back, which got some attention. They offered bottles of water or sports drinks to the workers, all of whom were happy to grab a drink and enjoy the view of the helpers in their casual outfits and smiling faces under straw hats. Jack waited for everyone to get their drinks before moving his horse closer to the truck. He took a sports drink from his sister and a cold bottle of water from April, but turned down the snacks. Thanks. You two are more refreshing than the drinks, and I appreciate all you're doing. I think the others will feel the same, so maybe circle around like we talked about. Before you head back, check on Carl's group in the East Pasture, then see how the workers at the pens are doing. It'll take us a little while to get started, so there's no rush. Janice smiled at him. Don't think we don't notice the friendly attention. I've missed the guys around here. Even when they're staring, they're kind. Jack could see April watching him from the corner of his eye as he listened to his sister. She always liked seeing him on horseback, dressed like a cowboy, so he kept his horse steady, even though she wanted to chase after the other horses that were getting farther away. She tossed her head and pranced, but he held firm, showing her he was in control. He noticed April blush and turned to her. What about you? Are you enjoying serving the friendly cowboys? Her blush deepened as she looked at Janice and said, I agree with Janice. The men here are all gentlemen. I like helping them stay hydrated, but we've stayed here long enough. We should catch up with the herd. He nodded and let his horse run fast. She took off like a galloping horse with him sitting comfortably in the saddle. Wow, that guy looks great on a horse, doesn't he? Janice teased her friend, who was watching Jack ride away. Stop it! We have a job to do. Janice laughed at her and they got back into the truck. They drove north toward the SAM site where more grateful men were waiting. Carl and some of the workers turned at the fork in the road and rode toward the East Pasture. Meanwhile, Jack and the rest herded the cattle toward the working pens. Janice and April found many thirsty, hungry animals at the outposts, which slowed them down. Perhaps the animals needed more water and food than expected, or maybe the men just liked to chat with the beverage girls who also enjoyed the company. Jack was not thinking about being attacked, so he didn't notice when Red and Wayne took off and made a move toward a helicopter flying about 500 feet above the ranch. But Captain Cross did. Through their earpieces, everyone on duty learned of the possible threat from the helicopter and how the group chose to avoid the restricted airspace over the ranch. Nothing major seemed to happen, but the group learned a little more about the defenses they might encounter if they tried to approach the ranch. By 5, the market calves had been turned into steers and were in the shipping pen with the cows that could not have more calves, along with some heifers and an older bull that did not pass the fertility test Dr. Huff performed earlier in the month. The heifers were tagged and marked with Jack's unique JA brand. The new Charolais bull Jack bought from Mr. Cox was also marked. He was loud and active, but gentle enough not to start fights with the other bulls. Fresh round bales were moved into the southeast and northwest pastures that had rested during the spring, and the 2 herds were being led to them. 2 bulls were assigned to each pasture for a 60-day breeding period for the spring calves. The gates to the north and east pastures were closed to help the land recover from grazing, while the heifers would replace the bulls in the southwest quarter section. They would be bred next year by a different bull. Everyone involved in the roundup and work had gone to clean up and change for the meal and gathering, except Jack. Jack was enjoying a drink from a red Solo cup after tapping the first keg, looking out over his land. He felt a satisfied kind of tired. The roundup and work were done, the crops were either stored or on the way to market, and the cattle truck was ready at the loading area. The driver and helper were guiding the cattle into the truck and would be on their way to market soon. While the sales might not increase his wealth much, he felt good about what they had achieved. Jack was a hard-working man, which suited his job as a farmer perfectly. He took pride in earning an honest living. As he turned and noticed dust rising from the road leading from town, he realized he needed to hurry. Guests were arriving, and he wanted to say a few words of thanks before the meal. Just then, he saw April and Janice coming out of the kitchen. They looked at him with disapproval, noticing how dirty he was, and said, "We'll make sure everything's ready and greet your early guests. You need to hurry." Jack quickly changed into clean, pressed jeans, a polo shirt, and his boots. In less than 20 minutes, he was ready. He felt fresh and confident, especially in his yellow shirt since several women complimented him. While chatting with the Garcia girls, he noticed April watching him, though she looked more annoyed than impressed. Oh well. He had left the barbecue cooking to Carl and Jose and was surprised when they added pork from wild hogs to the menu. Jose had prepared ribs and shredded the hams, serving it all with a spicy sauce that made everyone's nose tingle and eyes water. It was a big hit, and people used plenty of napkins to clean themselves. The schedule for the workers was adjusted slightly. Those starting their shift ate at 6 and began their duties at 6:45. The workers finishing their shifts could eat right after arriving and enjoyed a drink afterward. The helicopter and drone pilots followed the same plan, but Alfred and Charlie chose to eat with the second shift since Mule was covering their earlier duties. The Garcia family provided amazing homemade tortillas, salads, vegetables, and fruits that paired perfectly with the pit-cooked meats. Their friendly and charming attitude kept a crowd around them, with some guests chatting and enjoying the company of the lovely attendants. At 8 o'clock, a local band started playing a mix of Tejano and country music, getting everyone out on the dance floor. Popular songs like Si Me Duele Que Duela got the crowd moving, but it took more upbeat songs to encourage the other guests to join in. As the night went on, the music blended traditional sounds with modern pop and rock, making Jack want to keep the good times rolling. Meanwhile, the young people, single ladies and some attached ladies were dancing to every song. The band leader, Flaco Ruiz, noticed Jack drinking and smiled. He addressed the crowd, saying, "Our host may be in his 20s, but he has an old spirit. If he's ready to come out and dance, we'll play some of his favorite music. He's hiding by the kegs, let's get him out here." There was a lot of cheering, but Cheetah took action. She sprinted over, took his drink, placed it on a table, and pulled him toward the dance floor. When they got there, Chan sang a 5-minute version of a song, followed by another, and then another. Cheetah danced with him first, Scylla took him for the second song, and then the beautiful daughter of the high school principal joined in. Jack didn't know who she was, but she was certainly attractive and a great dancer. As he twirled and spun, Jack noticed the other dancers and onlookers. April occasionally caught his eye, always dancing with someone else. He knew her well enough to see the forced smile on her face and the tightness around her eyes. It seemed she enjoyed watching him with the other women, but not the other way around. The song Trouble fit perfectly with Trisha, who held on to Jack for a second song. Jack was ultimately saved by her father, who pulled her away for another tune. The song with a thoughtful message made Jack look for April, who met his gaze while keeping a serious expression. Both of them were likely wondering if that song about lost chances resonated with their own situation. April finished her dance near Jack, and just as Rock in a Hard Place started, she released her partner and stepped toward Jack, who had extended his hand. She hesitated, he smiled, and she cautiously took his hand. They maintained a bit of space as the music played, and Jack looked into her eyes while the heartfelt lyrics filled the air. The song perfectly described their feelings. They had been missing chances together. Things weren't broken, but they needed some fixing. It had been a while since their kiss felt the same. They discussed forever while being together, but they found themselves in between a tough choice. Tears fell on her cheeks when he walked away. That was when things got complicated for him. Now he felt drained, wondering what it was all for. Would this be a moment to heal or to break apart? Caught between choices. For the record, it's tough. Giving up can take some effort. So I'd prefer to wait for better times together. As they danced, Jack's tense posture and steady gaze caught the eyes of those watching. They also noticed the expression on April's face change from worry to distress. When the next chorus began, Jack said something to April and pulled her closer. She tensed for a moment, but then relaxed. He held her close. Her forehead dropped onto his chest and her eyes shut. Jack quietly sang the last words of the song softly into her ear. "Is this where it gets better or worse? How much longer can we last?" Flaco, watching closely, replayed the beginning on his guitar, giving them a chance to step back, embrace, share a kiss, or just take a moment without the silence being too heavy. Everyone in the shed was focused on them, knowing that their marriage was struggling. People held their breaths, waiting to see if they were trying to fix things, or if this was the end. With the last note played, Jack let go of her hand, turned, and gently guided April back to the chairs they had left for the dance floor. He pulled her chair out, helped her sit down, leaned over and thanked her for the dance. She didn't reply but looked up at him. Her unease was clear, as was the silent question in her eyes. He smiled and took a seat behind her. She faced the table, glancing sideways at him. Flaco y los Vaqueros de la Brazada announced they were taking a break, encouraging everyone to leave the dance floor and return to their tables. This gave the Armstrongs a moment out of the spotlight. April still seemed confused, while Jack was friendly and attentive. He offered to mix her a drink from the bottle she and Janice brought, or to bring her a cup of beer when he got his. Like almost everyone there, Janice watched the couple on the dance floor, and when Jack sat April down. But she didn't see the tension in their bodies or the lost look on April's face. To her, it looked as if April were a scared puppy around a master with a history of being unkind. The fact that April had let her guard down meant even a harsh word from Janice's brother could hurt her best friend deeply. Jack had been polite but distant since his earlier attempt to apologize in the spring, and Janice saw no sign of bad intentions in his actions that evening. He had simply asked his wife to dance, looked into her eyes, spoke softly, and she gradually relaxed, leaning into him. Even now, sitting alone at a table in the middle of the busy scene, Jack seemed cheerful and calm. He did not look like the same person who had faced and defeated them a few months earlier. Janice held on to Lieutenant Dan's arm a bit tighter. "Let's head to our table. I would like a drink and to chat." "I get it," he replied softly. "I'm keeping an eye on them, too. I've never seen April look so unsure, scared, vulnerable. Is she worried about your brother?" "Only that he might hurt her feelings again, but that's a long story for another time. Let's join her and him if he comes back and try to enjoy this lovely night." April had a drink in front of her that she hadn't touched. She had opened her purse and was looking in a mirror when Dan and Janice said hello. She immediately stood up, looked at Janice, and asked her to go with her to the restroom. Dan said he would make Janice a drink, grab a beer, and meet them back here. Jack noticed them leave and watched as Dan walked toward the keg, where he was next in line. He got 2 beers and gave one to the lieutenant, who thanked him and headed back to the table with him. "So you and my sister, huh?" Jack asked with a mix of teasing and protectiveness. Then he wondered why he still felt protective. She was an adult now, with a past that was probably more complicated than Dan Wilkins's. It wasn't like he would take anything away from her. "Honestly, right now we're just friends," Dan answered. "I wish it could be more, but she keeps me at a distance." "Have you talked about what happened in the last few years?" Jack asked. "No, but I know her story well enough. It was all over the news for a long time, and the captain explained that what they know puts them in a lot of danger. If she thinks I would judge her for being misled and used by those people, then she doesn't understand me very well. I can't imagine anyone would blame her for what happened to her. To me, that's like a long time ago when people wrongfully blamed women and children who were taken from their homes. I mean, Native Americans. What happened was not their fault, they were victims. Victims have to do what they can to survive, and I say that from experience. In Afghanistan in 2019, for over 3 months, I faced so much hardship. I was hurt, cursed at, kicked when I was down, insulted, and treated poorly. I wasn't harmed in ways others were, but I couldn't have defended myself if I had needed to. I was too weak and broken. I can't imagine how strong those two had to be to make it through all they did. After a month, I just wanted to give up." Jack looked at the ground for a moment, then said softly, "Well, wow." "What's wrong, Jack? Did I say something off?" Dan asked, sounding concerned. "Off? No, not really," Jack replied. "No, but you shared ideas I hadn't thought about, and I feel embarrassed I didn't. Anyway, you two should have that conversation. Don't blame her if she's worried about people being harsh about those past 2 years. At least one person has been, so I bet she's a bit guarded about getting close to someone without knowing how they feel about her experience." Dan replied, "I'm going to ask her tonight. I'll let you know if she says no." As they walked back to the table, one of Jack's old friends from high school came over and started talking to them. The women weren't back yet, so they chatted about light topics, their good old days, how great Flacco's band was, and how much they enjoyed the meal. April and Janice exited the restroom and walked toward the table, so Jack tried to wrap up the conversation, but Billy Bob put his hand on Jack's arm, leaned in, and said, "Can we talk here, or do we need to step outside? I have a couple of important things to share." Jack looked around and noticed no one was paying attention, so he said, "It's up to you. How sensitive is it?" "I'll keep it friendly and casual like I have been. You do the same. It's important. Dan, can you take April's drink to the table? I'll join you in a minute, but please apologize for me." Dan took the drink and went to the table while the old friends continued their chat. I'm still working as a welder for EOG. Last month, 3 of us were on the new pipeline near your neighbor's place. It was just after 2 a.m. and we were taking a break. We heard and later saw a convoy of shipping containers moving down the road to your place, which got us speculating as men do. Juan Flores and I thought it might be for feed storage, maybe to keep the rats out. But Ray kept coming up with wild ideas about them being related to all the army things at your place and over at the Franklin Ranch just across the county line. When we finished at dawn, Ray asked Juan if he thought your new neighbors across the river would be interested. Apparently, they've been paying for information about you and what's happening at your ranch. Ray isn't here, but you might want to catch up with him about that. It's the first I've heard of it. The other thing is, those same guys have had a few convoys of their own late at night. I saw them myself when I was checking lines on the river a few weeks ago. I was in my kayak, so no one noticed me. But they were using a forklift to move boxes that looked a lot like the shipping crates we used in the Army, plus a few bigger ones. Whatever it was, it all went into that large barn Arnie built just before he passed. I don't know if any of it matters, but I thought you should know, my friend. Jack thanked him sincerely and headed back to the table. All 3 welcomed him with smiles, though April's seemed a bit forced. At that moment, he decided it was time to be loquacious Jack, the entertainer and storyteller. April clearly felt nervous about the person she had been avoiding for a while. Jack put on his lively persona, became loud, and soon they had a crowd of about a dozen gathered around their table, laughing and having a good time. Clay was among them, playfully teasing Jack as they had done since they were kids. Flacco came over, joined in, and the fun got even better. April got caught up in the excitement, and she and Janice shared a few stories and jokes, too. Before long, more than half the guests were around the table, adding their own stories or good-natured teasing. Jack was the main target of the jokes, but he took it all in stride. As the laughter continued, they reminisced about their school days and the good times they shared, including April and Jack's courtship, wedding, and honeymoon. It was time for the band to play their next set, but Flacco, understanding the moment, signaled to hold off for a bit, sharing a knowing glance with the band members who were also enjoying the stories. There were still many stories to share, but Jack decided to wrap it up after nearly 30 minutes. This is so much fun, but we have Flacco and his talented band here. Let's enjoy their music and have a little dance. I'll set up a get-together for the Cowtown Liars Club when it cools down, and we can all share stories from sunset to sunrise. Just make sure to bring your own drinks. Everyone cheered at the suggestion and began moving towards the dance floor. Flacco, reading the mood, led the band back and made an announcement. Our host tonight has asked for a few slow songs, so we're going to play some classics, starting with Amarillo by Morning, which reminds him of his brief time in rodeo. Jack, these are for you, so come on out and try not to step on too many toes. Jack looked across the table at April, who was sitting next to Janice. Do you want to dance? I promise not to step on your toes. April hesitated, wanting to say no. Dancing with him felt too personal, and she knew she needed to keep her distance and not let her feelings get in the way. However, she noticed Cheetah, Scylla, Jackie, and June watching closely, hoping she would decline so they could have their chance. Feeling a twinge of jealousy, April finally said, Okay, I'd love to. They stood up, and he took her hand, leading her to the dance floor as the band began playing the familiar song. The dance floor quickly became crowded, and what began as a simple two-step turned into a warm embrace, similar to what everyone else was doing. April felt uneasy, aware that this was testing her willpower. It didn't take long for Jack to pull her close, resting his hands on her waist. This is not good, April thought, as she avoided pressing her head against his cheek, which smelled like her favorite cologne. To make matters worse, she felt an ache in her stomach that reminded her of feelings she hadn't experienced in a while. She had been with others recently, but the deep longing she thought she had left behind was still there. And then she felt Jack pressing against her, which only intensified her emotions. She tried to back away, but instead found herself moving closer, worried she was losing control on the busy dance floor. Just then, the music stopped, and space opened up as some people headed to their table. Abruptly, she pulled away. Thank you, she muttered, escaping back to her table alone. Jack stood there in confusion, while Flacco began to sing a lively Mexican song about warm beaches and sweet moments. Cheetah, who was nearby, grabbed Jack's hand and joined him on the dance floor before others could step in. The crowd quickly gathered around them. She wrapped her arms around his neck, drawing closer to him while enjoying the connection. With her head resting on his shoulder, she inhaled his familiar scent, aware that her own fragrance seemed to affect him too. Cheetah was striking, with light skin dotted with freckles across her nose, a slim waist, and a confident demeanor. Her family was proudly Spanish, with no mixing of backgrounds, having married within their bloodline for over 200 years. However, Cheetah had her plans. While she would visit Spain in the fall as her family wished, she hoped to marry and start a family with the mix of backgrounds that surrounded her right now. She faced challenges, beginning with getting Jack to see her as more than a good cook. Thankfully, things were progressing well. Next, she would have to find a way to navigate his complicated situation with his first wife, who seemed to be complicating matters. She needed to persuade her parents to accept Jack or convince him to go with her to Spain to marry in the old Catholic church their families claimed. Once that was done and lovely grandchildren arrived, she believed her parents would forgive and forget, but that was still a long way off. Right now, she had to keep Jack interested and excited, finding a way to get closer to him. She moved closer, standing on her toes to catch his attention. His hands slid down her dress, and she felt a sense of achievement. Tomorrow could be a bit tense at the ranch, especially if his ex showed any interest, but it seemed a small price to pay. She would need to lock her door tonight for safety, but she had to stay focused. Cheetah was nearby when the dance ended, which helped her as she skillfully guided Jack to another dance. He wasn't completely under her influence yet, but he didn't suspect her intentions, making it easy for her to steer the situation. She made gentle sounds of enjoyment, feeling the excitement growing between them. She dreamed about a future with him, filled with love and children. April felt regret for turning down Jack, seeing him getting close to another woman on the dance floor. It was embarrassing, especially since it revealed that their marriage was struggling, and she knew others could see it too. Janice and Dan returned to their table for drinks. Dan noticed April's upset expression and followed her gaze to see the attractive man she was watching. His name was Floyd, and he invited April to dance. She agreed, and they danced for several songs until the style changed, and Floyd seemed unsure, preferring to return to the table to watch Cheetah show off her skills on the dance floor. Jealousy stirred within April, and she couldn't help but feel frustrated. She thought to herself, how could she let someone else take Jack's attention away, especially when she knew her worth? "Looks like you lose this time." April caught the eye of Pretty Boy, but her serious attitude and lack of interest made him pay more attention to the lively girl dancing nearby, who was happily showing off her beautiful legs. She was cheerful and seemed to be enjoying Jack's company. Jack was more attractive than her husband and was available, so it was clear that she would choose him if given the chance. And then, the opportunity arose. When the song finished, Jack thanked his partner and quickly returned to his table, leaving lovely Cheetah frustrated and by herself. Floyd wasted no time and danced with Cheetah, moving to the upbeat tunes from Justo's accordion. April was feeling a bit colder now. Jack didn't mind and took a seat next to her, asking if she wanted a new drink. She hadn't even noticed her glass was empty since she was too focused on the lively dance floor and the feelings of jealousy. She nodded, so Jack hurried to the keg for a beer, grabbed some Sprite and ice for her glass, and quickly returned to the table. He mixed her drink and handed it to her. She took a sip, leaned back in her chair with her back turned to her husband, and didn't pay him any attention. She knew it was a little childish, but if he wanted her, he had to earn it. A voice in her head scolded her. "Are you really willing to push him away? Here he is refreshing your drink, choosing you over that younger girl, and you act like this? What's going on?" Staying confident, Jack placed his hand on her shoulder, leaned in close, and said, "This is the first time I've heard Flacco and his brush country cowboys. I can see why they're popular on the local country and Norteño charts. They do a great job with both styles, plus that fun Mexican fusion everyone loves." For the first time since being at the Liars Club, April found herself amused. "You do know you're just 28, right, Jack? To most people here, you're still young, and Cheetah certainly thinks you're a kid." Jack sensed the hint of jealousy in her voice and felt a little pleased. Still, he replied lightheartedly, I mean the high school and college kids. I've been looking after my sister since I was 18 and managing a ranch and my businesses since I graduated 7 years ago, not to mention being married for those years. I don't see myself as young, and I bet others feel the same way. I'm almost your age, Jack. So are you saying I'm old? She asked, with a playful edge to her voice. Not at all. No one would mistake you for a skinny teenager. You look just as good as any college woman here, or anywhere. But still, you are just 25. Nice comeback, she said with a little laugh. Jack smiled as he heard the familiar tune. It felt like it had been ages since he last enjoyed music like this. As the next song started, he glanced at Flacco, who was beaming at him. He returned the smile and asked, April, do you remember this song? He wanted to share a moment with her. April turned around in surprise, ready to respond, but then she saw his inviting smile. He stood up and she joined him. Even though it wasn't the song they had chosen for their first dance as a married couple, it was the second song they loved from Texas State. Flacco and the band took their time with the introduction, allowing Jack and April to make it to the dance floor. They poured a little more feeling into the song than the original, and Jack's voice filled the air as he danced with April. Every morning when you come downstairs, hair's a mess, but I don't care. No makeup on and shining so bright, my old sweatshirt never fits so right. Dancing around to the radio, humming the words that you don't know, 'cause I'm finding an angel off my list. Thinking that it don't get no better than this. You make loving you easy. You make loving you all I want to do. Every little smile, every little touch reminds me just how much it all means. Loving you easy. April tried to keep her distance, feeling caught off guard by the moment. This isn't fair, she said playfully. He responded, All's fair in love and war, as he drew her closer. Is this you making love or making a point? She asked with a laugh. It's hard to tell the difference since I got back. The busy season is over. Everything is in place now. Give me 3 days and we'll sit down and talk things over. I know we've been in a bit of a standstill for a while, but you share some of that blame too. Can we call a truce for the next 3 days? She didn't answer right away, but her hair brushing against his face and the way she relaxed in his arms spoke volumes. Flacco then broke into a lively rendition of The Midnight Hour, filling the room with energy. He and the band were truly talented musicians. Jack, April, Clay, and Janice stood together near the parking area, warmly saying goodbye to each guest. In return, they received heartfelt hugs and thanks. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for tonight, Jack and April felt a sense of joy and connection with their community. Though she never said it aloud, April accepted the truce. She was warm and friendly, just like she was with the others at breakfast. Most of the day, however, Jack was occupied in the basement, watching videos they had gathered from different sources. The raw footage was quite different from the edited versions they had found earlier. By late afternoon, everything he thought he knew felt shattered. He had spent almost 9 hours reviewing the recordings, but now he faced a fresh question. How did they manage to last that long? He wasn't sure he could have done the same. To start, Janice didn't bring April in willingly. Worried about her sister-in-law's safety, Janice avoided acknowledging April until they could meet alone in a safe, quiet place. She picked the location carefully and told April to take a taxi toward the Beltway, waiting for further directions. The instructions led April to a restaurant, Hank's Waterfront Oyster Bar. Once there, she scanned the room and quickly spotted Janice sitting at a booth by the window. They greeted each other with tears of happiness, took their seats, and began chatting. A server came to take their order, and the friends continued to catch up. But soon April asked Janice why she had stopped reaching out. Janice suddenly tensed up, and the mood shifted. She started to cry and begged to avoid that discussion. When their meals and tea arrived, April suggested they wait to talk about it until after they ate. They resumed their conversation about home and Jack while enjoying crab cakes and stuffed flounder. But the atmosphere changed during the meal. Jack noticed that they seemed a bit off, despite only eating seafood and drinking iced tea. The situation took a turn when a woman from Jack's past showed up, taking a seat nearby and introducing herself to April. Janice was furious at her presence and exclaimed, "You promised I would have this time." "I lied," Christina shot back. The king is interested in your lovely sister-in-law, so she will join you tonight." April looked between them, seemingly at a loss for words. Janice tried to stand but couldn't, and when she attempted to confront Christina, she was similarly unsuccessful. Suddenly, 4 large men arrived, helping both April and Janice to their feet and leading them outside to a waiting car. They were hardly aware as the ride began. Jack reflected on how many people would have tried to help if this had happened to someone in his town, shocked by how indifferent city folks could be. Watching everything unfold was proof of the far reach of the King's organization. There had to be cameras in April's apartment, the taxi that picked her up, the restaurant, and the car that drove them away. The cameras in the cafe showed the server who spiked their tea getting paid $1,000 for doing it by a person they called the bitch. She later bragged about it to Janice. Jack had been impressed by what he learned about Daniel King, but now he understood why people admired him so much. His influence was everywhere. This job was not going to be as easy as he had thought. Even though he prepared himself for what he might see, having watched other recordings, this was much worse. It wasn't just the inappropriate content, it was the behind-the-scenes talk about his wife and sister as if they were toys. April was being treated terribly, kept scared and under the influence, used by others in a way that left her feeling completely helpless. The scenes he saw were upsetting, but it was the other details that made it hard for Jack to watch. Now that he understood more, he wished he had taken stronger action against those who hurt them. They seemed to take pleasure in breaking their spirits and mistreating them. He should have faced them with the same strength. There were still 129 more hours of footage to go through from the compilation Alfred and Charlie made for him. They told him the raw recordings they had gathered were many thousands of hours long if he wished to watch them. These recordings showed a year of April's captivity, 2 years of Janice's, and who knows how many lives of other women in similar situations. It seemed they filmed almost every moment of these women's lives, even their breaks and private talks. Jack decided not to take that offer and asked them to organize the compilation so he could choose what to watch from the 12 10-hour days he hadn't seen. They laughed and admitted they hadn't seen it all either. They used AI to find and save parts based on certain searches, and then skimmed through it to check if it was relevant and in order. They then showed him how to access the hidden index and mentioned that the segments marked in red were recommended for a closer look. Jack turned to leave but paused to ask, "Did you two pick segments that show less harsh treatment for the girls?" "The feeling I got from your compilation is different from what I got watching the recordings on the Senator's servers. It feels like some footage was added to explain their actions." Alfred shook his head. "Boss, you should watch their journal next. Then you'll understand. Watch that, and then you can check out the other 130 hours we put together, or the thousands of hours of raw recordings from different sources if you want to. To answer your question, if anything friendly happened to the videos, you can blame Alice. Maybe she felt sorry and changed the video and audio, but we didn't tell her to do anything like that, so I'm pretty sure she didn't. Croc and I only talked about the date and time, so the mashup would be in order, not mixed up based on the source." "Alice is the AI?" "Yes," Croc said. "Hey, boss, they called us for dinner a while ago, and we missed lunch too, so let's go eat with everyone else." The three were surprised but happy to see the table ready and the group waiting for them. They were invited to grab a plate and start the taco, burrito, and enchilada buffet. Jack motioned for the others to go first, and Croc was eager. April was nice to him again, as she was to everyone else. Maybe the peace would last until he could finish what he needed to watch for his own peace of mind. Right now, he was glad they had made a peace agreement. He wasn't quite ready to apologize to her. Jack woke up early the next morning, feeling good and full of energy, with a new plan in mind. He got coffee and a breakfast sandwich from a friendly Scylla and went to the basement. Sue and Croc were tired. It was clear they had been up all night, and Charlie was a bit short with him. "We have the journal loaded. It's only 2 hours long, so watch that and then come back in here. On the way back, clear your mind. Things are happening, but you have time to watch the journal before you're needed. See you at 9:20 on the dot." He returned at 9:17, but he was still confused. He wished he had listened to his friends and heard their stories after that first encounter. It was hard to understand how either of them could still be near him. No one that wrong and hurtful should be forgiven. He wished he could bring back the 3 senators, and the person he felt had betrayed him, along with a few others who had caused trouble. He had never tried anything extreme, and while he wasn't sure how to go about it, he wanted to imagine a scenario before moving on to more serious matters. Captain Cross helped clear Jack's mind quickly as he, along with Sue, Croc, and Mule, shared what they learned from various sources. The group included Carl, Janice, April, Renee, Elias, and Ranger Allen, who were all representatives of both manned and unmanned aircraft. They also had squadron leaders for different duties, both on-site and off-site. Jack listened carefully as plans were made. He didn't see any problems, even though he knew little about military strategy, and this was certainly a military plan. A conflict was about to start that would be much bigger than the small issue with the New Jersey Mafia, which felt like a simple family fight. The main focus was on the new neighbors across the river, who seemed well prepared based on what was seen from the air. There were also reports coming from other areas. The news from the county to the east seemed harmless, but it worried Jack. He turned to Carl, who frowned and shook his head. "Excuse me, have you talked to the Franklins about this, Major? They are very private and do not usually have guests. As far as I know, they only have visitors during the annual Turkey Creek Arts and Crafts Fair near their old homestead by the creek, and only trucks meant for cattle should be there. We haven't spoken with them. We did send a drone over their ranch, but only saw 2 large trucks delivering animal feed and hay," the Major replied. "No," Carl insisted. "That shouldn't be happening. They have some of the best hay fields in South Texas. They produce their own feed in Beeville, and the mill delivers it to their barn. Those aren't regular feed sacks, and something seems off." "Get drones on it, and send scouts immediately," Captain Cross ordered. "If Carl and Jack have suspicions, we need to investigate them." Red added, "The sheriff wants to ride in the Huey and pretend he's the gunner. Do either of you want to join him? It seems we'll be heading east today." The meeting wrapped up with a sense of urgency in the air. Before they left, Jack called April and Janice to a corner. "I looked at your journal yesterday and watched 9 hours of raw footage from King's server, starting with your dinner at the Oyster Bar. I want to apologize for what I said before, but I can't find the right words to make up for my thoughtless comments. I'm trying to do better, and I promise to give my best effort soon. I know it won't be enough, and you might feel anger toward me forever. But I want to show you how sorry I am for hurting you when I should have welcomed you home." April looked at him, unsure of how to react, but Janice smiled. "We'll be waiting, and it better be good, you arrogant fool." Then she winked and said, "Now go out there and figure this out. We don't want to leave this world without hearing you apologize and see you make things right." The 4 men climbed into the county's newest helicopter, a Sikorsky UH-60A Black Hawk. It ascended quickly and flew at over 150 miles per hour, covering the 45 miles in no time. Jack and Carl might not have military training, but they were observant and knew the area and its people well. During the flight over Franklin Ranch, Carl noticed things the drones had missed, while Jack pointed out oddities that looked innocent to Red and Renee. Their updates to the captain and Ranger Allen led to another meeting, resulting in revised plans and new orders for the squads. At first glance, it appeared that infantry and equipment were being gathered in a pasture next to the Armstrong Ranch, but the real threat from Franklin Ranch was missiles. 2 truckloads of cargo being unloaded remained a mystery. How many intruders were there? How long had they controlled the ranch? What else had they moved? The contents of an old barn looked like 2 very large trucks that Red thought might be carrying missile launchers, seen from a bad angle as they flew by quickly. Were they? What kind? And were there more around the ranch? "We need to find out the last time anyone saw Frank Sr. or Jr., Walt, Harvey, or any of the women," Jack said. "What about the kids? There is no way the Franklins would side with them, so they must be held against their will, or... I don't want to think about the other possibilities. The elder Franklins were friends of my family, and I roomed with Walt for a year at Texas State. Good people like them don't just vanish." Carl had many friends in Bobcat County, so he took on the task of locating the Franklins. Jack joined Choi in the barn's new UAV flight control center for a better view of the ranches to the north and east. Red and Wayne were flying the helicopter over the land to the south towards town, while Danny operated another UAV in widening circles outside town, helped by Raul Medina, who knew the area well. They were making sure to cover all their bases now that the situation was urgent, but their attempts yielded little. An air attack could come from any distant location, including another state, Mexico, or the Gulf, but they felt certain that any ground attack would originate from the west, where they had strengthened their positions overlooking the land between the house and the river. Cheetah and Scylla made club sandwiches for lunch. Most had already eaten, so they joined the men when they came inside. The playful flirting from earlier was gone, and the sisters were back to being cheerful and teasing each other. They enjoyed their meal, and then Carl signaled for Jack to step outside. None of the Franklins except for Walt have been seen in 3 days. Walt has been at the bank daily, but the teller said he seems really off and distracted. So they are probably keeping the family safe, and Walt is doing what he can to help. We still have CDs and investments there. Should we take someone with us, go over and ask Walt about a loan to buy more cattle using the CDs as collateral? I'll be there at 9 when it opens, Carl said. Should I call you if I learn anything important? Only if it seems urgent, and you can get the captain to provide a secure satellite phone to call the secure line here. We don't want to risk the Franklin's safety over a phone call that could be made in person. The house was too quiet. Jack checked all the rooms, then went back to the kitchen and asked the Garcia sisters where everyone was. He found out that Elias, Ranger McLeod, and Wash had taken Janice and April to San Antonio for a medical appointment. They knew it was on the base, but didn't know who had the appointment or when they would be back. Jack decided he had time to watch a few more clips of the mashup. He had learned what he needed about April's first months there, but he wanted to see the time just after he was told he had been killed, and the final weeks after the senators were harmed, and many others were at risk. Daniel King had been the first person to mistreat April in captivity. He was the one who chose her for service, and had continued to take advantage of her to satisfy his needs and those of some powerful clients. Jack found this hard to watch. Was she still with him at the end? Did they have a strange connection? Did she care for him? Was she there as his spy? He wanted to trust the video journal, but he needed to see and hear for himself. He planned to apologize for his behavior when they returned home and do his best to make things right, unless they turned out to be untrustworthy. He didn't believe that, but he would feel better if he watched those last days, tried to understand their feelings, and heard their words. Maybe King had recorded enough that he had trapped himself and his partners. Only one way to find out, he told himself, walking down the stairs to the basement viewing room. Hours passed, and Jack finally had his answers. He turned off the computer, stretched, and opened the door, only to find himself face to face with a serious sheriff and an upset captain. "Step back inside, Jack. We need to talk," the sheriff said firmly. "Can I use the restroom first? I've been in here for a while," Jack replied. Captain Cross stepped aside, and Jack hurried to the restroom, relieved to take a quick break before the discussion. He was very worried about the upcoming conversation. Both the police officer and the soldier seemed off. "April and Janice made it to their doctor's appointment on time, Jack. Their escorts waited in the area like they were told for almost 3 hours. They asked a staff member to check on them, and when he returned, they learned the appointment took less than an hour. There was no way they came back the same way they left, so they started searching the building, which is really big. They didn't find anything and learned nothing, so they went back to the parking lot. Their vehicle, the Suburban, was also gone. I'll give you the details if you want, but to get to the point, the SUV was found at your apartment, but the women were nowhere to be seen. We have no clue why they vanished or where they went. I put out an alert and the highway patrol was notified. We haven't found out anything useful, but I can assure you this wasn't a random decision. It was well thought out and they disappeared quickly." "Well, wow! Sit down with me and watch something. It's ready to play." Surprised by his reaction, Abraham and Renee sat down to watch a video. It showed April, Daniel King, Janice, and a man named Ahmed Ali the day before they were released by the FBI. They were talking about whether to escape to another country or for the two women to go back to Texas to cool things down after April's husband stirred up trouble. The women wanted to go back, while the men suggested leaving for a place that wouldn't send them back home because they feared their involvement would be discovered. In the end, They decided the women could return to the ranch to mislead anyone searching for them, while the men would stay alert for any signs of trouble from law enforcement. If that happened, King and the Sheikh would leave on the plane, and they would arrange for the women to join them later. "Well, wow," Renee echoed as the lights came back on. "Are they trying to leave for another country, or what happened to them? It looks really questionable." "I'm calling my FBI contact. They should check the flights that left for places connected to King or the Middle East." After his call, Captain Cross offered another viewpoint. "It seems like April and Janice might have been tricking those men in that video. Remember, that was 5 months ago. They could have found out they were in danger and came up with this plan to escape, or maybe they were taken against their will." "Just saying, we don't have any solid proof for any of these ideas. But how do we figure this out?" "Let's go through everything they left behind," Jack said. "Assuming this is their plan, they couldn't take much without raising suspicion. I'll have Alfred and Charlie monitor any messages they sent or received, and—" Jack paused, looked at Renee, and with a smile asked, "So how are the trooper and ranger handling this situation?" "Not well at all," Renee replied, managing a small smile of his own. "Elias was really upset, calling everyone names and saying they tricked him from the start. This isn't funny, but they're grown-ups who've made a choice I just don't get. And tell Elias I understand how he feels." "All right, let's take a moment," Jack said. "Yes, we want every resource to help find them, but what does this mean for our plans? If they have shared our plans with King, how much trouble are we in?" "That's a good question, and we need to look at our plans with this in mind. The enemy may know what we can do and what we want to do. That leads to another question. If they are with King, what happens to the rewards on their heads? All this effort and support isn't just for a $100K reward on you, Jack. If they don't leave, we have to assume that you are really the target, and the rewards were always for you. Saying they are on the girls could have just been a distraction to keep us off their trail. And another important question is, how long do we wait? If we can't find anything here or online to help us understand their plans, do we just sit here and wait for something to happen, pull back, or go after them? These are very dangerous people. If they don't attack, do we just let them get away? Renee, how do you feel about that?" "No, Captain, but I doubt it will be my decision. Our state and federal support is for defense only, so they may require a good reason before we go after them. On the surface, we haven't seen them break any laws, so what do we do? I fear this is beyond my office, but I might have to make a decision because, while we don't want to do anything that could help them legally, we also don't want them roaming around Cow County," Jack interrupted. "Maybe we don't have a lot on the group across the river, although I think a judge in Laredo would issue a search warrant based on what we have. But if they are holding the Franklins against their will, and I believe they have broken state and federal laws. Can we find out quickly while staying ready here?" "Wait, I have 2 more important questions. Knowing what we know about Daniel King, do we let him and his supporters get away? Or do we report this to the FBI, show them his messages that seem like confessions, and tell them we believe he has taken April and Janice and is trying to leave the country? After all, we don't know if they left willingly. And the biggest question of the day, what do we do with their video journals? They provide names, dates, places, and first-hand accounts that are supported by the videos we have. They also mention banks and accounts where illegal money is stored. If we share this information with everyone they mentioned, won't that risk them getting hurt? I see that could be a problem if we wait a month, but until we know they are really with him and turned against us, I'm not comfortable releasing the videos we plan to share." Renee sighed and replied, "Jack, I have 2 concerns about involving the FBI this much. First, if we show them the videos, they will want to know how we got them, and they may take them from us, just like they did with the gangsters, and those people still haven't been charged. Once they have the video and audio files, I worry they might say we obtained them improperly, which would mean they can't be used in court, and the bad guys would get away with it again." Jack said, "All right, then let's search this place thoroughly, and have Sue and Croc look into their online activities. Once we do that, we can press the issue with Franklin Ranch. Neither the federal nor the state authorities can ignore foreign individuals taking American citizens and property and launching illegal actions against other Americans. Can they?" "I really hope not," Abraham Cross exclaimed. I know sometimes politics complicates things for law enforcement, but I believe the U.S. military would be very upset if they found out. Then choose a team, set us down near the Franklins' home and barn, and let's check our suspicions. If we find something, you can reach out to someone in the military, and Renee can connect with state and federal law enforcement, and we'll see what happens. If any agency hesitates, we need to think that King is somehow influencing the decisions being made by important people, which is both scary and totally unacceptable. If that happens, or if we are attacked, I suggest we have Sue, Croc, and Mule, if she's willing, anonymously share details from King's discussions with media outlets, bloggers, and online platforms about everything he admits to, like trafficking, exploitation, harming others, or any other illegal actions he brags about in the videos we have. He can't blame April and Janice if they're not with him by choice, and the government can't protect him or his friends. I think we should do this as soon as they're ready, but we need to be careful, as it might provoke a situation we could avoid, especially if the girls are the ones with the bounties and not me. So let's ask them to prepare it, and if things go wrong, whether before or after we contact the right authorities, we will act. The captain and the sheriff nodded in agreement, so Renee opened the door and called for Alfred and Charlie. Once they were in the conference room, Jack presented his plan. They exchanged smiles and looked at each other. Should we do it now? We created the AI search function for this, expecting to find confessions and videos of unlawful actions. So we can send the package whenever you like, with as much detail as you need. Should we involve another officer to review what they have, or will you handle it, Renee? I trust Alice, but Danny can double-check. It's just a short walk to the UAV center in the barn. Captain, how many helicopters do we need for the team heading to the Franklins? I can get at least 3 that are designed for hunting and livestock work. They can fly in and out without attracting too much attention like the Huey would. We can also use them to transport more people to the landing zone, but it's better if they don't see us unless we have to act. That's 9 with the smaller choppers, including Jack and Carl, and about 6 on the Huey with the pilots. That should work. I have their numbers, so I'll step outside and make some friendly calls for help. I'll be back in about 10 minutes, Renee said as he hurried toward the stairs. Jack grinned at Abraham. The best laid plans, right, Captain? Exactly, Jack, exactly. Jack and Carl teased each other while dressed in camo, vests, and helmets fitted with communication devices. I bet they didn't think about South Texas heat in July when they made this gear, Carl joked. No, they probably had summer in Iraq in mind, where today's heat feels like a cool spring day. Stop complaining, this gear could keep you safe, Wash shot back as he guided them into a helicopter. They were familiar with the pilot, Jim Harris, who had taken them on hunts along the river when wild hogs became a problem. He nodded to everyone, told them to buckle up, and then took off. Along the way, the other 2 small choppers joined them a few minutes apart, with the larger Huey trailing about 8 minutes behind. As they approached a spot where they might be spotted, the other 3 helicopters turned north toward San Antonio and vanished behind the ridge that surrounded Turkey Creek. The lead chopper followed the Franklins' southern fence line, acting like they were looking for hog crossings. Carl and Jack leaned out of the open doors without their helmets, holding rifles, looking like they were on a hunting trip. Wash used binoculars to scan the area around the house, commenting as he observed. He noticed guards or scouts on the hill near the caliche pit, to the west of the house. There were men in the old house by the woods and several stationed around the sagging barn between the house and the woods. And he pointed out that there were tracks from large vehicles leading into the barn. They were flying along the southern edge of the Rancho Viejo, which shared its border with the Franklin Ranch. When they reached the end of the Franklin Ranch, the helicopter turned left and followed the eastern fence line to the north. Carl and Jack continued to look for wild hogs and shared sightings with each other. Were they being careful? Did outside fighters know about hunting hogs from helicopters? Probably not, especially if they were truly from Eastern Europe. However, the people they could see seemed ready to watch and let them pass. Once they crossed Turkey Creek to the north, they turned west toward their meeting point. Jack called Renee to share what they had seen. Renee included him in a call with a lawyer from the Department of Justice and a federal judge. The lawyer and judge asked a few questions, and Jack and Wash responded. Then they learned that the warrant was signed and sent electronically. Renee informed the team that a group of FBI agents, Texas Rangers, and state troopers were approaching the turn leading to the ranch house, and Captain Allen confirmed that the plan was ready. According to the plan, they would move in from the north and west. The mixed group would approach from the south, but half would head to the ranch house while the others rushed toward the barn where the missiles were believed to be. It was a solid plan, and it mostly worked. The part that did not work was that while they were getting in position, the enemy backed the trucks with the missile launchers out of the barn and raised them for action. Jim Harris spotted them first and quickly informed the others. Wash took a glance and said, "Those are surface-to-surface missiles. They're going to hit the ranch." Red and the helicopter were on their way, but 2 missiles launched before he could act. The third missile took some hits and exploded where it was stationed, sending a fireball and debris across the other launchers and a large section of the barn. Wash, leading the team, shouted, "Charge! Move in!" And the helicopters delivered their teams to the prearranged spots. Red dropped his team from above and started shooting at the larger group of mercenaries stationed on the ridge. They were trying to reach the house, but the low brush provided no protection from the air assault, and those who weren't injured quickly took cover. The Delta Cross Alpha team moved through the brush to get between the enemy and the house and began advancing on the downed fighters. The Beta team, made up of state troopers and rangers, moved toward the barn, where they encountered no resistance from the injured men still there. Charlie team, which included Wash, Carl, and Jack, met Ranger Bill White near the cattle pens, and they carefully made their way toward the house, moving along the drainage ditch beside the road. They, along with all the members of Beta Team except the one watching over the injured men, surrounded the house at the back and front doors. As soon as they were set, Ranger White used a loudspeaker to announce himself, ordering everyone inside to come out right away. In response, gunshots rang out from the house. Carl and Jack quickly crawled back from the front line and moved to a brushy area on the side of the road. They were located south-southwest of the house, where the land sloped down sharply. They found shelter from the house's view, hidden among tall mesquite and huisage trees. Jack discovered a concealed door behind a large black brush, and they began to work on opening it. They cleared rocks and dirt from the base with their boots and used old branches to make space around the sides. After some effort, they pulled on the door, which creaked and seemed ready to break. It opened a little. With more digging at the base, they managed to open the door wide enough to enter. With their rifles strapped on their backs and tactical shotguns ready, they stepped into the old tunnel that had been around since the Cold War. There was a shelter halfway down the tunnel that likely hadn't been opened for years. When they were kids, they had played in this tunnel and used the shelter as their fun spot. As they moved on with flashlights, careful of any snakes, they approached the steel door of the shelter. Just as they got close, they heard noises coming from deeper in the tunnel. They paused, and Carl crouched down, aiming his shotgun at the sound. "Check the door. There's nowhere to hide in this tunnel." Jack found the handle and pushed, but it barely moved. "Help me, this door feels heavy and stuck." The two of them pushed together, and it slowly creaked open without making much noise. Once it was wide enough, they grabbed their shotguns and stepped inside. The noise got closer, and a light shone past them. "We must be getting close, right?" a woman's voice asked. "I think so, but it's been years since I was down here," a man replied. "Mommy, I'm scared," a child's voice said softly. "Just stay quiet and follow me, sweetheart. I'll get us out soon," the man whispered back. The voices were really nearby. Jack cautiously called from the door. "Walt? Craig? It's Jack and Carl. We're in the shelter." "Oh no, you scared me. This is Walt. Craig's behind me. We have both families and Mom with us." "Then follow me out of here. Carl will lead the way. We both have shotguns." They stepped outside and found the families huddled in the drainage ditch below the door when Carl heard several pairs of boots running in the tunnel. Jack handed his rifle to Craig and told him to lead their families down the ditch to the east. Other team members were working at the house. "Are there any other family members or friends inside?" he asked. Craig shook his head and quickly walked away to guide the families. Jack and Carl lay side by side at the entrance, shotguns ready, with Carl's rifle between them. They saw figures approaching. "Wait until you can see their eyes," Jack whispered. "I'm ready when you are," Carl replied. They opened fire, and the sound echoed in the tunnel. Afterward, they waited a moment, then backed out and closed the door before hurrying to join the Franklins. When they reached the front of the house, it was quiet. They peeked through the trees and saw men lying in the yard. 2 rangers and some troopers stood nearby, while men from Delta Cross gathered, listening to a call. The noise from the Armstrongs and Franklins coming up the road caught everyone's attention, and Wash shouted for them to come over. "The attack on the ranch started when the missiles were launched. Our missiles didn't reach Cow County, they were shot down, but we know the house has been hit multiple times and the fighting is intense. If things are calm here, we need to head back to help. Red has already gone." "Ranger White, can you handle it? We need to get back to the ranch," Jack called out. "Go. We have it under control and help will arrive in 5 minutes." The group ran towards the 3 helicopters waiting in the clearing near the barn. The pilots started them up and headed straight for Armstrong Ranch. About 6 miles out, Captain Cross directed them to the hayfield and instructed them to approach the enemy positions from the northwest. Jack and Carl weren't professional soldiers, but they were fit and skilled with their rifles. After an 8-minute sprint, Wash slowed their pace and gave orders. Carl and Jack would act as snipers from behind the large mesquite trees on the hill northwest of the house. Wash planned to move closer to the house to guard the tunnel that came from the basement and to fire at anyone trying to attack. They quickly got in position and took a look around. "Wow!" Carl exclaimed at the sight of the damaged house. "It's just a house," Jack said. "It can be rebuilt. I just hope no one got hurt and that Alfred sent the supplies everywhere just in case." The captain had set up a counteroffensive, but the enemy was well hidden in the brush. They were well hidden from the ground, but not from above. The loud sounds of gunfire and explosions made it hard to notice the sharper cracks of the rifles. They took out 3 targets each before Carl hit one in the leg instead of a more critical spot. The target screamed and pointed at the hill. Carl shot again, hitting another opponent in the chest, while Jack got one more who was about to shoot back at them. They had to stay behind the trees when bullets flew past them. This only lasted a few seconds, as the advancing troops forced the enemies to focus on the front and south sides instead. Hiding in bushes while being shot at is not safe, since the bushes can't stop the big bullets, and sadly, 5 more enemies found out too late. With the snipers causing chaos and explosions all around, the defense began to struggle. Then the warthogs appeared, bringing with them a chilling sound from their cannons that frightened everyone nearby, including Jack and Carl, who suddenly felt very small behind the trees. They were scared, and the enemy troops were even more terrified. The few survivors from the first attack fled toward the river. Jack and Carl fired until they needed to reload, stopping only when they saw the enemies were over the river and out of reach. Jack remembered an old song about a battle that turned into a wild chase. Unfortunately for the enemies, the Gulf of Mexico was far away, and many law enforcement officers were waiting at the ranch from which the attack had started. It was quiet for a few minutes, then shooting started up again briefly, and then silence followed once more. They would soon discover that the mercenaries who were still alive had decided to give up against the stronger force. However, not many surrendered, while many more lay in the hot dirt, no longer alive. Thinking it was all over, Jack and Carl made their way down the hill to the ruins of their historic rock house, which had sheltered their family for over a century. "Well, the barn looks all right. Guess we can stay together for now. Are you planning to rebuild?" "Of course, but I'm afraid my insurance company won't agree," Jack responded. "So I'll use some funds from the king, since he is to blame for this mess." Cross walked out from the tunnel leading to their shelter, a place they had set up with shipping containers. He waved as he approached them. "Sorry about the house, guys. They had hidden artillery across the river. The A-10S took it out after the second round, but they caused some serious damage up top." Alfred and Charlie mentioned that the basement is still standing, which is good news. Luckily, none of the 4 missiles aimed here got over the fence, but they created quite a show when the defense systems hit them. "The nearby ranchers will be cleaning up metal pieces for a long time unless the government steps in," Carl said. Renee approached them, limping and with stained pants. "It's nothing serious. How did it go at the Franklin Ranch?" "The family is safe. The missile launchers are destroyed, most of the enemy is gone, and the survivors are captured," Carl replied. Things are better there than here, but they did lose the old barn. Are our people okay? We're not sure yet, but we know we have 3 who didn't make it and at least a dozen hurt. It was a tough fight. They outnumbered us and were better armed than we expected, Cross explained. Ambulances are on the way. Where have the A-10S been? I can't believe they got this close with those planes around. You wouldn't believe it. All the drone missions we flew totally missed a couple of missile launchers hidden in the hay barn. When they launched the first 2, the planes were nearby, so they had to change their target and come back, Carl said. How did you feel on that ridge when the fire started? I was terrified, and I heard Jack crying and begging. That was the scariest sound I've ever heard. I might not sleep well again thinking about it. You were scared, and it was you crying, not me, Jack replied quickly. All right, I bet you were both scared. I know I was, and I was behind the armored vehicle, Renee joked. You 2 might want to stay in town for a while, he continued. This area will be off limits for weeks, as state and federal law enforcement, along with the military, will want to investigate what happened. This is the first major battle with foreign fighters on American soil since the War of 1812, so please be patient. Can we still use the basement? Alfred asked. There's a lot of work to do online. I'll do my best to argue that the basement and shipping containers aren't part of the crime scene, but I'd advise taking care of things quickly while everyone is focused on the chaos. By the way, are you 2 all right? This may be your second battle today and 3rd this year, and facing such events can weigh heavily on us. You 2 were involved in quite a bit today. I'm not speaking for Carl, but I see it like dealing with rattlesnakes, Renee. When I see one in the pasture, I keep my distance and let it be. It's live and let live out there. If they set up a hideout by my house and threaten my family, they will face serious consequences. They are not much better than rattlesnakes, which at least help by getting rid of rats. So I'm not too upset. Maybe I will be later, but probably not. I haven't lost any sleep over those troublemakers. I find them less human than those gangsters. Renee turned to Carl. I agree with him. Maybe I will feel different later, but right now I feel less upset than when I had to say goodbye to my horse. All right, then let's help Sue and Croc, Renee said. He gave a small shake of his head. But tell me if you need someone to talk to. Cross looked puzzled, so Carl said, He's comparing us to El Mariachi. You know, the movie about the guy who seeks revenge? I don't know that movie, but I understand now. I'll watch it when I can. One of the 3 defenders who lost their lives was an FBI agent. Another was an observer from the Department of Justice, and the 3rd had just joined Delta Cross. The loss affected everyone deeply, prompting the DOJ to ease its usual strictness a bit. Losing their own made things more personal, and they did not need to follow all their usual rules during interviews of those captured. They also took their time to secure the area because they were aware of the basement. Alfred sent out information about King and his associates just as the first shots were fired. The chaos in Washington quickly reached the federal agents in Cowtown. The details were sent from various servers worldwide, which kept the media from targeting any one place for interviews. Instead, they all rushed to Washington, adding to the chaos there. Before they left the basement, Mule passed along a flight plan for a corporate jet traveling to Mexico City from Bourne, Texas. The pilot and passengers were not listed in the U.S. database, raising enough concern for the plan to be flagged and sent to the FBI. Mule caught it and shared it with her partners on the ranch. There are 2 women and 3 men, including the pilot. Do we have any information about the plane? Renee asked. It's registered to a shell company in Venezuela, and this is listed as its first flight, at least in the U.S. Charlie replied with a raised eyebrow. All right. Check the Mexican flight records to see if there's a plan filed for the Middle East, Africa, or even Eastern Europe. These people don't have to follow the rules since they won't be coming back. Hey down there, are you almost finished? A voice called out. We can give you a few extra minutes, but a deputy director is on their way and you need to leave before they get here. Don't worry, we won't interfere too much. We'll do as little as possible since this area didn't see direct conflict. Just keep us in the loop when you can. If only everyone could be this reasonable all the time, Renee said, shaking his head. I'd always keep them in the loop. Since they're not, let's make sure we keep them informed we must, not just should. Okay, boss, Jack replied. Heavy on our idea of must, right? Exactly, the sheriff said. Not like they treat us, but until we're sure, let's take a broad view of must. They gathered what they needed and put it in one of the vehicles in the barn that was in decent shape. Thankfully, it was Carl's truck, so there was room in the covered bed for servers, laptops, monitors, and a cart with files that no one else needed to see. Alfred looked sad. I almost activated the burn switch when we left, but I can do it remotely if they send a strong enough team. I hope they don't, though that is my creation, and I really like it. Well, my friend, my favorite spot is in ruins above it, so I'll say what I told Carl. It's just a building we can always rebuild. Plus, once we know no one is following us, we're heading to Happy Place too. Really? Oh, that sounds great. I could use some fresh air and seafood, Carl said enthusiastically. You guys need to drop me off in town then. I have a mountain of reports and a ton of interviews to get through. I don't know where you've been, but remember, they have resources, so expect them to come looking. They better hurry, or we'll be at Happy Place 3. Renee laughed, but warned, You might want to talk to them, Jack. You don't want them finding all your favorite places. Tomorrow afternoon is fine, but not today, tonight, or in the morning. We have things to do. A little over 2 hours after dropping the sheriff in town, they were at a table full of seafood at King's Inn on Baffin Bay. After an hour and 2 beers, Carl, Jack, and Abraham were sitting on the back deck of Happy Place 2, near the rocks on Baffin Bay, having a discussion. Charlie was inside looking into some tricky parts of the web, and Alfred was checking some important records. Alfred found something first. Hey, everyone, you need to see this. Me too, Charlie called from the secure room. They joined Alfred in the secure office. Look at these security tapes from the Mexico City airport. 4 people moving from a business hangar to an SUV. The image is a bit blurry, but isn't that Janice in front? There's a woman with the man I think is Daniel King, but I can't see her clearly. They watched as Alfred rewound the tape, then Jack spoke up. That's Janice. I recognize her walk and that dress. I think that's April, but I'm not sure. If that's Janice in front, then that must be April with King. I don't see anyone pointing weapons at them, Cross said, so they probably aren't being forced to stay. Oh, they aren't, or if they are, they have internet access, Charlie called. All 3 of you come here. This just came up, it answers one question and raises many more. We saw what you shared. They're going wild. Don't share our journal until tomorrow after lunch. You're right. They have internet access and are there willingly. But why ask us to share the journals? When King and the Sheik of Araby see those, April and Janice could be in trouble. That message raises other questions, but the biggest one is, what are they planning? None of this makes sense, Cross complained. I agree it makes no sense, so let's focus on what we do know, Jack suggested. What's the global reaction to the King of K Street being revealed? How are the royal families responding? How many divorces are happening, and how many people have been arrested? I wanted to wait a bit before asking, but it's time. Sue, check the websites again while I update everyone, Charlie said. Okay, as of 90 minutes ago, no divorces yet, it's too soon. The 3 royal families and the 2 prime ministers have no comment at this time, and there haven't been any arrests. But cases have been opened in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, California, and Washington, D.C. We expect Florida and Texas to follow, but King has been a big supporter of campaigns in those states, so it's uncertain. At the request of the DOJ, the president has appointed a special investigator to lead the inquiry, citing concerns about sensitive information and serious corruption. Worldwide, things are chaotic. I won't go into the gossip magazines or the online news sites, but this time it's hard to track the differences between them and regular news outlets. When presented with video and audio evidence of manipulation and pressure on government officials from many countries, clear proof of bribery affecting major decisions, and the involvement of some of the wealthiest people on Earth, they went wild. Add to that the reports of young women being taken advantage of and discussions among the wrongdoers about silencing them, and you can imagine the outrage. It's a frenzy that makes the earlier scandals look minor. If the state and special investigators really take action against those named and shown on video, when do you think we will start to see legal actions? Jack asked the group. It's hard to say, Cross replied, but I think it could start as soon as tomorrow. It will take some time to file the divorce papers, but I bet many top family lawyers on the East Coast will be ready by tomorrow, and a good number in Illinois, Texas, Florida, and California, too. I wonder how many private jets are flying off to safe places right now, Carl guessed. The morning began with bright sunlight sparkling on the bay. Jack sat on the dock, enjoying a cup of coffee he had brewed outside so he wouldn't wake anyone else. He had gone to bed at 11 but woke up at 3 to make sure Alfred and Charlie went to sleep, saying they might face questions from the FBI and needed to be rested. Abraham was looking at news on his laptop with Carl, but Jack took it away and told them to get some sleep too. It was past 7, but he wanted them to rest until at least 9, so he placed all their phones on a table in the shade. Jack's phone rang first. It was Renee. "What's up, Sheriff? That's quite a cheerful greeting for your situation. How much coffee have you had?" "Just 2 cups, but they are really strong. So, what's going on?" "The deputy director came here to keep things under control, but after this new special counsel called, he was quiet and went back to where he came from. More agents from other agencies arrived last night, so the governor sent more rangers and investigators to help, and I'm stuck in my office. Need some help with the fishing? They don't want me to do my work or talk to anyone until they decide what I can say." "Oh, and the town is filled with news vans. Someone seems to think the issues here are linked to the problems elsewhere. Everyone in Cowtown is getting interviewed because if you can talk, you're getting a chance to share your story. The other guys are sleeping in after staying up too late, and I have my fishing pole but haven't cast it yet. If you and any others want to fish, come on over. I have plenty of space at my place with a fishing pier, a swimming area, and 2 boats. By the way, before I made them go to bed, the boys were surfing and caught some good waves. I thought you might like to know that. I'll send a count. See you at King's Inn when it opens at 11. 4.5 hours later, feeling full from the flounder and shrimp they had eaten, they gathered in the secure office, looking at Jack with anticipation. "Well, it's nice to have you all here, especially those of you for the first time, but if you're hoping for me to explain everything, you'll be let down. So, who wants to go first, law enforcement or the tech guys?" Alfred and Charlie had taken a break to eat at King's Inn and looked quite pleased since before they left. "You all go ahead, we'll go last." "Danny, your news is fun too. Catch them up," Renee said. With a big smile, Danny started to share his story. "We've been using the SNR drones, and Red has placed microphones inside and around the house so we can hear what's being discussed and planned. You would think that since these are federal agents," he said, shaking his head. "But we're glad they didn't take action because it helps us know what we know. By the way, Red and his team are listening to almost everything said out there. Anyway, the new group of guys seems lost and confused, and the ones who were already here are tired and frustrated from trying to bring each new group up to speed. Even those who were involved in the earlier planning are still struggling to catch up. There is one guy, though, a tall man who looks like he might be from the Middle East, and he's smart. He has some good ideas. He really wants to talk to you 5, pointing at Jack, Carl, Abraham, Alfred, and Charlie. But so far, it hasn't been made a priority by his bosses. Still, I would be ready by tomorrow. He knows what he's talking about and can convince others. Last night, they were heading in many different directions, some of which included hiding things until they got the call about the media buzz. The ATF, FBI, Homeland Security, and CIA, the whole group still weren't working together when we left town, but the special counsel is putting strong pressure on them, and the media questions have them worried. I expect they will sort things out soon. I could share some funny stories, but Alfred and Charlie seem eager, so I'll let you share your news, boys." Alfred jumped in. "This morning before we went to lunch." "No, start with last night. They need background," Jack said. Charlie took the lead when Alfred looked a bit let down. "Let me handle it, Sue, then you can continue." Charlie explained about the plane landing and the travelers getting off in Mexico City. He showed them the blurry video and then shared the text that was supposedly sent by April or Janice. "So now you have evidence that the women are involved with King and the Sheik?" Elias asked with a serious look. "It seems that way, but the message is confusing," Jack replied. "How can they not worry about King finding out they told on him after lunch today? If they are with him, they're in big trouble once he learns the truth. If you let Alfred speak, maybe he can clarify that," Charlie suggested. Everyone turned their attention to Alfred. "They have 4 rooms at the Hilton Mexico City Airport. The 2 women are sharing 1 room, and the 3 men each have their own rooms on different floors." Charlie managed to access the security footage. and we saw them coming back to their rooms with several bags of items late yesterday. This morning, all 5 of them came out of their rooms looking different. They had changed their hair color and styles, wore loose tourist shirts and shorts, and covered most of their faces with glasses and hats. Mule informed us that a flight plan had been filed for a plane headed to Madagascar. It was set to leave in 4 hours, but it seemed they already left the hotel and were at the hangar, which raised our suspicions. I agree that this doesn't explain why they said they would release the journals after lunch, but maybe they meant they would be in the air by then. Still, when they land... "Have we heard anything else from them?" Carl asked. "Not since we started our meeting. Let me check. Oh, wait. Yes, I see another message on that dark site. Do you want me to read it?" "Definitely." "All right, it says, 'Dearest, no, this one is private. Jack, come over here, it's for you.'" Jack approached the laptop and started reading. His expression changed from concern to sadness, and soon tears streamed down his face. When he looked up, he said, "They don't care about the journal because they think they will soon be gone. They plan to take down the plane while it's over the ocean." He continued, "The rest of the message is an apology to me, Carl, and their friends for what they did while under King's influence, and for taking the easy way out. There's more, but it's personal, and I don't want to discuss it. I will say this. Their willingness to sacrifice themselves to stop King and the Sheikh is clear, but it's not relevant to our investigation. Please print it out and then delete it, Charlie. I don't want anyone else to see it, especially the authorities." "Do you want me to reply for you?" Alfred asked. "No, she said not to, and she wouldn't be able to read it anyway. We've had Mule looking for business jets leaving the airport, but no luck so far. Charlie, can you see anything on the airport video?" "Yes, they just opened the hangar door and are taxiing toward the runway. Should we try to stop them?" "How?" Abraham responded. "Can you access their controls? There's no time to get the local authorities involved to ground the plane. I'm afraid we can't." They all silently watched as the twin-engine jet came to a stop at the end of the runway, sped up, and took off into the sky. It turned east, climbing higher until it disappeared from view. Everyone looked at Jack with understanding, though Carl and the others also had tears in their eyes. Jack quietly said, "Release the journal." It was April's final wish. Alfred turned and typed some keys, adding to the worry of those who had exploited the women, those trying to hide the wrongdoings of the wealthy, and those who would have to look into and charge the new names mentioned in the journal, many of whom were well known both here and abroad. Police officers realized that a story this significant would draw a lot of questions about their work from the media and from the families of the rich and famous. These families would fight hard to protect their interests, using all the resources they had. No one in the FBI or the Justice Department wanted this job, but it was unavoidable. The evening news mentioned a private jet that had crashed into the sea near Negril, Jamaica. The plane belonged to a member of one of the royal families from the Emirates and went down in shallow waters a few miles from shore. Efforts were being made to find survivors and identify those on board. There were no further details at that time. Jack and Carl stayed strong throughout the afternoon, but it was clear they were in pain. Every man there felt it. They tried to hide their feelings by drinking beer and watching the events around the journal, which the media had called the heroic journey of April and Janice. Once again, they were seen as heroes, but this time the honors would be awarded after their passing. When night fell, they moved their chairs to the dock, drank beer, and shared stories about the girls when they were growing up, before their lives changed. They watched the lights flicker on around the bay and the nearby island as they talked. Janice loved looking at the stars almost from the time she was born, Jack said softly, gazing up at the twinkling night sky. I bought her a nice telescope for her quinceañera, and our friends teased me for encouraging her passion. But she loved it, and it helped her cope with the loss of our parents. She even paid to name 2 stars after them, and would try to show me where they were. She quickly got her best friend interested in stargazing, too. By her 16th birthday, they could name every constellation and many stars I had never even heard of, so I bought her an even bigger telescope. She still had it in the attic, or at least she did, until it was destroyed. I never really understood what they saw in the stars, no matter how hard I tried to learn from them, but it did bring April and me closer together and sparked our romance. I suppose I'll spend some money to name a couple of stars after them. Maybe somewhere in the Pleiades cluster in the Taurus constellation, if that's possible. That was their favorite cluster and constellation, Carl added softly. Can I help, brother? Jack looked up at the sky, nodded, and a tear dropped down his face. Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe to Infidelity Plus to stay updated with more captivating tales of infidelity and payback. Turn on notifications so you're the first to see our latest content.